Introduction. The Moon God Protocol. A Sam Tracer adventure. In the silent spaces between what we know and what we fear, the truth isn't just out there, it's waiting to be switched back on. Sam Tracer is a man living in a fold of reality. As a lone private investigator for the Watchers, a circle of shadows guarding the world from the inexplicable, Sam operates out of a warehouse-sized tesseract tucked inside a TR-3B Astra craft. It's a life of high-tech speculative engineering, 1950s detective aesthetics, and the finest hydroponic cannabis this side of the Van Allen belt. But when a pair of ashen-faced couriers deliver a jagged strut salvaged from the legendary, clandestine Apollo 20 mission, Sam's routine of hunting sentient waveforms and ghosts takes a terrifying turn. The artifact isn't just lunar scrap, it's a tuning fork for the ancients, etched with math that sings and glyphs that breathe. With his protocol droid Biff, a fedora-wearing machine with a penchant for THC oil baths, and a low tolerance for pigeon-stained camouflage, Sam must decode the resurrection protocol before the Sovereign-class vessel on the moon finishes its long, cold sleep. In a world where gravity is a suggestion and the sky is a disguise, Sam Tracer is about to find out that some secrets weren't meant to be buried, they were meant to be read. Chapter 1. Apollo 20 Artifact, Detective Tracer Investigates. The air in the tesseract didn't just smell like stale coffee and ozone, it smelled like the fractured geometry of a reality that had given up on making sense. Sam Tracer adjusted his beige fedora, the felt brim slightly damp from a humidity that shouldn't exist in a pocket dimension. He caught his reflection in the shimmering surface of a floating data shard. At 42, Sam looked like a man who had been folded too many times and never quite pressed flat. The sleeveless camouflage fleece, a DIY hack that gave his biceps room to breathe, clashed violently with the smart V-neck underneath. But Sam wasn't dressing for a gala. He was dressing for a world where the monsters didn't just hide under the bed. They lived in the frequencies between the radio stations. Beside him, Biff, a protocol droid whose human synthetic skin looked like it had been applied by a blind mortician in a hurry, straightened his own matching fedora. The resonance signatures from the Apollo 20 recovery site are problematic, Sam, Biff said, his voice a melodic chime filtered through a cheap vocal modulator. Problematic is my middle name, Biff. Actually, it's Aloysius, but I tell people it's problematic. Sam reached for a cigarette, remembered he'd quit 3 dimensions ago, and settled for chewing on a toothpick. Talk to me. Tell me why the Watchers are sweating through their silk robes over a piece of lunar scrap. Double quote. The Forensic Speculative Engineering Report. Biff gestured to the center of the office, where the tesseract's walls pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent gold. A holographic projection of a salvaged component materialized, a jagged, iridescent strut that seemed to rotate in 4 directions at once. Artifact ID, AP-20-X1, the cello strut. Material composition, a lattice of metallic hydrogen and what Sam's sensors identified as solidified intent. Double quote. The anomaly, it wasn't manufactured, it was thought into existence. This isn't just hardware, Sam muttered, leaning in until the holographic glow turned his eyes into twin nebulae. It's a tuning fork for a sentient waveform. If you hit this with the right frequency, you don't just go to the moon, you go to the idea of the moon. Double quote. A fragile piece. Sam felt a familiar itch in his left hand, the one that had touched a ghost in 2022 and never quite felt warm again. He was a lone wolf in a pack of celestial sheep, working for a circle that gave him the tools to see the truth, but never the permission to speak it. He was Sam Tracer. He found things that didn't want to be found, for people who pretended they didn't exist. Biff, Sam said, his voice dropping to a gravelly rasp. Load the speculative engineering suite. We're going to reverse engineer the soul of this machine, and if the Watchers don't like what we find, they can try to evict me from a room that doesn't have an address. The droid's optical sensors flickered. That would be statistically ill-advised, Sam. Yeah, well, statistics never had to kick a sentient shadow in the teeth. The fragrant wisp of cannabis smoke curled around Sam Tracer's beige fedora, a temporary anchor in the shifting realities of his tesseract office. He leaned back into the plush, borrowed boy's seat, a relic from some bygone era, perfectly suited for deep contemplation. The seat itself was an island in a sea of anachronistic tech. His immediate surroundings were a meticulously crafted 1950s detective's office, rich wood paneling, a heavy oak desk, and a muted Persian rug. It was a comfortable lie, a mental sanctuary. Beyond the quaint wooden door, the illusion dissolved into the vast, humming expanse of the tesseract. Here, a borrowed zero-point energy generator thrummed, feeding power to a dazzling array of laboratories equipment, quantum computers, and holographic displays that lined the bay areas. Each screen pulsed with data, all linked to the colossal main system that was Sam's true partner in crime solving. He took a slow drag from his pipe, the herbal scent mingling with the ever-present ozone. Sal and antimony, the names floated like dust motes in his mind. The two Watcher couriers who had delivered the Apollo artifact to him barely an hour ago. They looked like they just crawled out of a crypt, their faces ashen, eyes wide and haunted. Their fragmented tale of a sovereign-class vessel on the far side of the moon still echoed in his thoughts, a chilling counterpoint to the chirping birds he now observed. Sam glanced at the monitor disguised as his office window. Outside, through the virtual pane, dawn was just bleeding its first tentative colors into the sky. The digital street outside was slowly coming to life, rendered with uncanny realism, complete with chirping birds and the distant hum of traffic. He saw Biff, standing rigidly by a virtual lamppost, his synthetic skin looking particularly dull in the nascent light. The droid probably needed an oil change, and Sam knew just the place. Your THC oil bath in the laboratories, Biff, 4 blocks inside the tesseract. It's calling your name, Sam murmured, exhaling a plume of smoke. Don't want you seizing up on me when the real fun starts. He watched Biff's virtual eyes glow a faint blue in acknowledgement before the droid's figure dissolved from the street view. Sam smiled faintly. Even in a dimension-bending office powered by forbidden physics, some routines remained reassuringly mundane. He savored the taste of the herb, letting it untangle the knots in his mind, preparing him for the strange truths that lurked beneath the surface of reality. The Apollo artifact was no ordinary piece of space junk. Sal and Antimony's terror was his first clue, and Sam Tracer had a gut feeling this was going to be one for the history books, or at least, the Watcher's highly classified archives. Sam set the pipe down and picked up the iridescent strut. It felt lighter than it should, as if the atoms were only half invested in being solid. He reached into his fleece pocket and pulled out a brass-rimmed monocle, a higher-resolution spectral microscope that looked like a Victorian curiosity but functioned like a CERN laboratories. Squinting through the lens, he felt that familiar Kuntz-esque chill crawl up his spine, the kind that suggests the universe is much older, and much more indifferent than we've been told. Well, look at you, Sam whispered. Along the beveled edge of the metallic hydrogen lattice, a series of micro-etched glyphs shimmered into view. They weren't just carved, they were vibrating at a frequency that made the monocle's glass hum. Interspersed with the symbols were mathematical strings that looked like wave functions for the soul. Biff, belay that oil bath, buddy. Get over here and earn your silicon, Sam called out. The protocol droid shimmered back into existence near the oak desk, his beige fedora slightly askew. He didn't look at the artifact first. Instead, he pointed a stiff synthetic finger toward the monitors showing the simulated street. Sam, I must once again register a formal complaint regarding the Astra's exterior maintenance, Biff chimed, his tone dripping with mechanical indignation. The local avian population, the pigeons, specifically have been utilizing our hull as a communal latrine. Since we ran out of the grade A green crystal plasma for the holographic projectors, our hedge and shrubbery disguise is looking suspect. To be frank, the hedge currently has a 3-foot white streak down the middle that no biological flora should possess. If a botanist walks by, our cover is blown. Sam waved a dismissive hand through a cloud of smoke. If a botanist is looking that closely at a hedge in a parking lot at 5 a.m., he's a spy, Biff. Now, look at this. The side of the strut. Double quote. Biff leaned in, his optical sensors whirring as they zoomed and refocused. The blue glow in his eyes intensified, pulsing in sync with the vibrations of the artifact. For a long moment, the only sound in the tesseract was the low thrum of the zero-point generator. "This is not merely math, Sam," Biff said, his voice dropping an octave into a reverent hum. "These are linguistic blueprints. According to the Watcher's deep archive cross-references, this represents the old language, the original tongue of the ancients. It's a set of instructions for the sovereign-class vessel." Biff looked up, his synthetic face a mask of digital dread. "It isn't a ship log, Sam. It's a resurrection protocol. The vessel on the moon isn't dead. It's just waiting for someone to read the manual." Double quote. Chapter 2. The transition from the 1950s warmth of the office to the cold, clinical reality of the TR-3B was like stepping out of a dream and into a nightmare designed by a mad geometer. Sam set the resurrection protocol strut onto a velvet-lined lead tray. The artifact continued to hum, a low, lonely sound that vibrated in the marrow of his teeth. "You're right, Biff. Between the ancient moon god instructions and the pigeon-painted camouflage, we're a sitting duck. Or a sitting hedge. Either way, we move." They stepped through the office door, leaving the smell of oak and herb behind. The interior of the Astra unfolded, a cathedral of matte black carbon fiber and pulsing fiber optic veins. They walked the long corridor toward the cockpit, a journey of 100 meters that felt longer due to the tesseract's habit of stretching the floorboards when it was hungry for power. They passed the medical wing, where surgical lasers hung like frozen lightning, and the decontamination showers that smelled of ionizing radiation and mint. Then came the hydroponic sanctuary. Through the reinforced glass, Sam caught a glimpse of his true prize, rows of emerald green cannabis plants, swaying in a synthetic breeze. The speculative strain was growing well, fed by nutrient-rich water and light frequencies that didn't exist in the natural world. It was a forest of tranquility buried in the heart of a war machine. "The plantation is at 40% humidity, Sam. Optimal for resin production," Biff remarked, not breaking his mechanical stride. "Though I still maintain that using a zero-point reactor to grow Blue Dream is an inefficient use of a localized singularity. It keeps me sane, Biff. Sanity is the rarest resource in this galaxy." They reached the control nexus. The seating was a pair of custom-molded gravity couches. Sam's was worn leather, Biff's a reinforced titanium throne designed to interface directly with the ship's nervous system. The dash wasn't a mess of buttons. It was a wraparound sheet of liquid glass that projected data directly into the pilot's retinas. Biff strapped in, his synthetic fingers dancing across the console. He paused, pointing a trembling hand at the main forward viewing array. "Look at this, Sam. It's a tragedy, a biological insult." Through the high-definition external cameras, the screen showed a smear of white, chalky avian waste directly over the primary optical sensor. It looked like a Jackson Pollock painting executed by a very angry seagull. "The birds haven't just put, Sam. They've established a colony on the hedge projection. If I engage the MFD ring now, we're going to vaporize about a dozen sparrows." The paperwork for the Watcher's Environmental Committee would be staggering. "Scrub the sensors, Biff. Use the exterior plasma wash," Sam commanded, gripping the controls. "We're going up. We'll park in the upper stationary orbit, disguised set to cumulus cloud and empty sky. We'll hang over the forest until the sun goes down. Nobody looks at the same cloud for 6 hours." The Astra didn't roar. It didn't have engines to ignite. Instead, the air around the craft began to shimmer and warp. Gravity simply stopped applying to them. With a stomach-flipping lurch, the warehouse-sized triangle slipped the surly bonds of the parking lot and ghosted toward the heavens, a secret piece of the moon's history tucked away in its belly. The ascent was a masterclass in silent physics, a whispered defiance of everything Newton held dear. The TR-3B didn't fight the air, it simply existed in a pocket of space where the air didn't matter. However, even the most advanced clandestine technology in the solar system couldn't account for human clutter. A muffled thump echoed through the carbon fiber hull, vibrating up through the floor of the cockpit. "Dagnabit," Sam barked, slapping the armrest of his leather gravity couch. "There goes my surfing annuals. I left them on the exterior ledge when I was checking the foliage emitters." Biff didn't turn his head, but his optical sensors performed a judgmental little 360-degree whirl. "A fascinating tactical choice, Sam, dropping 20th century memorabilia from a classified suborbital platform. Some child in the valley is about to have a very confusing afternoon, discovering the 1984 Big Wave edition falling from a clear blue sky." "They were collector's items, Biff. Real paper," Sam grumbled, watching the altimeter climb. "Just keep us steady." Biff's synthetic hands moved with the grace of a concert pianist, nudging the Astra into a perfect stationary vector. They hit 35,000 feet and leveled off. Below them, the forest was a carpet of deep broccoli green. Above, the atmosphere began to thin into a bruised purple. Biff engaged the auto-hold and deployed the air scrub unit, a spider-like cleaning droid that crawled out of a hull scene to begin the grim work of guano removal. "The S-Scrub is active," Biff announced. "It will ensure every microscopic trace of avian defiance is neutralized. I have programmed it to be thorough. Not a single smudge will remain to betray our silhouette." Double quote. The 6-hour countdown. Sam looked at the glowing clock on the liquid glass dash. They had 6 hours. 6 hours of silence in the sky to crack the code of the Apollo 20 artifact, before the Watchers expected a status report. "The Watchers are breathing down my neck about the mileage, Biff," Sam said, leaning back as the 0-point generator hummed a low, haunting B-flat. "They don't want us joyriding around the planet. Apparently, the Z-point bloom is starting to show up on the latest orbital sensors as a gravitational ghost. If we stay in one spot too long, we're a target. If we move too much, we're a beacon. And I still require my THC oil bath, Sam," Biff reminded him, his voice clicking with a hint of mechanical fatigue. "My primary actuators are currently operating at 88% efficiency. The friction is distasteful." 6 hours, Sam repeated, his eyes drifting toward the back of the craft, where the ancient moon scrap sat waiting in the tesseract. "Plenty of time to start a resurrection or end the world. Let's get to work." Double quote. Chapter 3. The S-Scrub unit was a silent, multi-legged shadow dancing across the hull, its laser scalpels peeling away layers of pigeon-born indignity with surgical precision. Inside the tesseract, the silence was different, heavy, expectant, and smelling faintly of the speculative strain Sam had enjoyed earlier. With Biff finally submerged in a vat of warm, premium THC oil 4 blocks deep into the craft's interior, the laboratories felt cavernous. The protocol droid's last act before his mechanical spa day had been to lock the AP-20-X1 strut into the quantum resonance scanner. Sam watched the monitors. The main computer's logic gates hummed with a sound like a distant hive of bees. The readout was a cascading waterfall of neon green. Status: active. State: entangled. Vector: lunar, lunar origin, destination. "So, you're a walkie-talkie for the gods," Sam muttered, adjusting his fedora. The scanner confirmed it. The strut wasn't just a piece of a S-35,000 hip, it was a transceiver, pulsing with a signal that bypassed the speed of light entirely. It was whispering to something on the moon, and something on the moon was whispering back. The Delport perspective. Sam left the scanner to its work and moved to the observation cupola, a bubble of reinforced crystalline glass located at the TR-3B's apex. He hauled a telescope that looked like a brass cannon, a spectroscope modified to pierce the atmospheric distortion, and aimed it at the silver coin of the morning moon. At 35,000 feet, the air was thin, cold, and clear as a diamond. He dialed the magnification into the Delport crater on the lunar far side. What he saw wasn't just a crater. Through the spectroscope, the shadows within Delport didn't behave like shadows. They were too sharp, too geometric. He saw the faint, shimmering outline of something massive, a sovereign-class vessel. It lay there like a dead leviathan, but even from this distance, Sam could see the ghost light of its engines, a faint ultraviolet shimmer that shouldn't exist on a dormant ship. It looked less like a wreck and more like a predator holding its breath. The ukulele variable. Sam returned to the lab, his mind racing. If the strut was transmitting, it was part of a circuit. And every circuit has a resonance. He reached behind his oak desk and pulled out a small, weathered ukulele. It was a humble instrument for a man surrounded by zero-point energy, but Sam knew that music was just math with a soul. He sat on the edge of his desk, tuned the strings, and began to play a slow, haunting melody, a bluesy riff that felt right for a detective at the edge of the world. Plink, pluck strum. The strut reacted. As the sound waves hit the metallic hydrogen lattice, the artifact didn't just vibrate, it shifted. The jagged edges softened, the metal flowing like mercury, and the entire piece began to rotate slowly in midair, independent of the scanner's magnetic clamps. It was dancing. For every chord Sam struck, the glyphs on the side flared with a soft, bioluminescent gold. "Well, now," Sam whispered, his fingers dancing over the frets. "Let's see if you know Fly Me to the Moon. You like the blues, don't you?" The artifact wasn't just dancing anymore. It was screaming in a frequency of light. As Sam's fingers danced across the ukulele strings, the strut's rotation hit a critical velocity. It became a blur of iridescent mercury, a spinning top of alien intent, that suddenly projected a sphere of shimmering points into the center of the tesseract. The air in the office grew cold, the kind of cold that doesn't just chill the skin but frostbites the soul. "It's a map," Sam whispered, his strumming hand going still as he watched the glowing constellations. "But it's a map of a neighborhood I don't recognize." A rhythmic hiss-clack announced the return of the partner. Biff stepped through the laboratory's archway, and for a protocol droid, he looked positively radiant. His synthetic skin was no longer dull and ashen, the premium THC oil had given him a supple, golden sheen, and his actuators moved with a silent, terrifying fluidity. He looked less like a budget mortician's project, and more like a high-end boutique mannequin, designed for a clandestine future. Biff adjusted his beige fedora, now also polished, and looked at the glowing sphere with a judgmental whir of his optical sensors. "I see you've been busy making music, Sam," Biff remarked, his voice now a smooth, frictionless baritone. "The scrub unit has completed its task, and I am currently operating at 99.4% efficiency, which is fortunate, because your map is currently radiating a level of entanglement data that is, frankly, impolite." Sam stared at the points of light. They didn't look like the stars he knew from his nights on the Maui beaches. "I can't make heads or tails of these systems, Biff. It's like looking at a city from the bottom of a well." Double quote. Biff leaned into the holographic display, his sensors scanning the coordinates. "That is because you are looking for distant suns, Sam. Look closer. These aren't extrasolar systems. These are specific coordinates within our own backyard." Biff pointed a gleaming finger at a cluster near the edge of the projection. "This point is the L2 Lagrange point behind the moon. This one is within the asteroid belt, specifically Psyche 16, and this," he trailed off, his blue eyes pulsing. "This is pointing directly back to the Delport crater." "I know," Sam said softly, his voice gravelly. He didn't look at the readout. He just felt it, a tug in his gut, like a magnetic north that had shifted inside his ribcage. "It told me, or I told it. We're on a first-name basis now." Biff made a clicking sound of disapproval. "Intuition is merely unrecognized data, Sam. Please, put the instrument away. The harmonic resonance is causing the zero-point generator to hiccup, and I'd prefer not to be dematerialized during my post-oil glow." Sam set the ukulele back on the oak desk. As the music stopped, the artifact didn't fall. It remained suspended, but its rotation slowed to a rhythmic, breathing pulse. "Check the intake, Biff," Sam commanded, his detective instincts overriding the herbal haze. "It's a transceiver, and it's mapping our system. It isn't just sending our location out. It's downloading something. What's coming through the pipe?" If Biff plugged a fiber optic lead from his wrist directly into the scanner's console, his head tilted at a sharp, inhuman angle. "Data packets, Sam. Enormous ones. It's not just a map. It's a Logistical manifest. The sovereign-class vessel isn't just a ship. It's a seed. And according to the telemetry coming in right now, the gardeners are already in the neighborhood. The interior of the Astra had become a sensory paradox. While the hull was a masterpiece of cold, clandestine physics, the air within the tesseract was a lush, fragrant rebellion. Sam had rerouted the primary life support ducts, forcing the sterile, recycled oxygen through the heart of the hydroponic bay, and a small grove of transplanted plumeria trees he'd brought from a hidden nursery in Lahaina. Now, instead of the metallic tang of a vacuum-sealed tomb, the office smelled of heavy tropical blossoms, damp earth, and the sharp, resinous promise of the speculative strain. It was the scent of home, a ghost of Maui floating 35,000 feet above the world. The air quality index is highly irregular, Biff remarked, his newly oiled joints gliding with silent precision as he hovered over the scanner. I am detecting traces of volcanic soil, floral esters, and enough THC metabolites to intoxicate a small moon. It is aesthetically pleasing, but it makes the internal sensors think we're a botanical garden rather than a tactical reconnaissance platform. Good, Sam said, leaning back in his boy seat confused. Keeps everyone on their toes. If the sensors are confused, the watchers are. He reached out and tapped the AP-20-X1 strut with a fingernail. The artifact didn't just vibrate, it let out a soft, melodic hum, the exact frequency of the ukulele riff Sam had played earlier. It was a perfect, haunting mimicry. Every time Sam or Biff leaned in to examine the glowing glyphs, the metal sang to them, a low-fidelity lullaby for a moon god. It's bonding, Biff. It's not just a machine anymore, it's an audience. While the singing is charming in a terrifying, existential way, Biff interrupted, his blue eyes flickering with the new data stream. The download has shifted. The seed data is no longer just logistical. It is becoming architectural. Sam, it isn't just telling us where they are. It's showing us what they are building. Sam stood up, the smell of plumeria thick in his lungs. On the main monitor, the shadow in the Delport crater was changing. The ultraviolet ghost light was no longer just a shimmer, it was forming a structure, a spire of light that was reaching out from the lunar surface toward the stars. They aren't just gardening, Biff, Sam whispered. They're renovating. Double quote. Chapter 4. The air in the tesseract suddenly shivered, turning from the scent of plumeria to the sharp, electric tang of ozone and sea salt. A vertical slit of white-hot light tore through the 1950s wallpaper, expanding into a shimmering vortal that bridged 35,000 feet of altitude and 2,000 miles of ocean in a heartbeat. Angel stepped through, looking effortlessly radiant in a sundress that seemed to hold the warmth of the Maui sun. In her arms, she cradled a large, silver-gray short hair that looked less like a pet and more like a predator waiting for a reason to escalate. Chloe Clops, Sam muttered, eyeing the cat. The feline's eyes were wide and golden, flickering with the same ancient, murderous intent as the stop-motion cyclops from the old Sinbad movies Sam had obsessed over as a kid. Chloe Clops had two eyes, sure, but she carried the spirit of the monster that had once haunted his nightmares, and she definitely had a taste for human blood, if you caught her in a mid-morning mood. Dinner is served, Sam, Angel said, stepping over a bundle of fiber-optic cables as the vortal snapped shut behind her. Angel, honey, Sam sighed, leaning back in his boy seat while the zero-point generator groaned under the strain of the sudden teleportation. That was a massive energy bloom. Every UFO nut from Kihei to Kahului just watched their light bulbs flare like supernovae. Even the ones with the power turned off are going to be reporting angelic visitations on the forums tonight. You're making us a very bright target. They'll survive the excitement, Sam. Besides, Biff looked like he needed the company, she replied, setting Chloe Clops down. The silver-grey terror immediately began a slow, deliberate patrol of the office, her tail twitching with mechanical precision. She wasn't alone for long. Out from the shadows of the lab equipment and the hidden corners of the hydroponic bay, the rest of the tesseract's feline residents began to emerge. There were 7 in total, ghosts in the machine, living in the gaps of the Astra's geometry. Among them, Quig 1 was the most formidable in his own peculiar way. As Sam stood up to greet his wife, Quig 1 was already at his heels. It was the cat's singular superpower, a relentless, tactical escort service. No matter where you were going, whether it was to analyze a lunar artifact or simply to the bathroom, Quig 1 was there, leading the way with a tail held high like a fuzzy antenna, ensuring you never face the perils of the hallway alone. "Biff," Sam called out, "set a third place for dinner, and maybe a bowl of that high-protein tuna for the Cyclops. I'd like to keep my shins intact for the rest of the mission." Double quote. Biff emerged from the back, his polished chassis gleaming. "A pleasure to see you, Mrs. Tracer. Though I must inform you that the energy spike from your arrival has caused the Apollo artifact to hum in a key that is technically discordant. It appears the seed doesn't like visitors." The artifact on the scanner flared a deep, angry crimson, its song turning from a bluesy ukulele riff to a low, rhythmic growl that matched Chloe Klopp's own warning purr. The S-Crab unit's response to Biff's plan was a series of sharp, rhythmic thuds against the hull, a Morse code tirade that translates roughly to, "I am a sophisticated piece of speculative engineering, not a grease monkey for a flying salad bowl." Right double quotation mark. "Ignore the spider," Biff said, his polished chassis catching the neon glow of the diner. "Its ego is currently larger than its processing core, but the logic is sound, Sam. If we submerge ourselves in the THC oil bath during the translunar injection, our biological and synthetic frequencies will be dampened, will be invisible to the seed's passive sensors, and coating the hull, it creates a refractive organic layer that confuses the gardener's spectral analysis. We won't just be a cloud, we'll be a ghost wrapped in a dream." Sam wiped the last of the burger grease from his chin. "You want to turn the most advanced stealth craft in the black budget arsenal into a giant, spacefaring tincture. It's crazy, Biff. It's Dean Koontz levels of weird." He paused, looking at Angel, who was already nodding. "I love it. Let's do it." Double quote. The deep soak modification plan. They moved from the diner back toward the Astra's engineering spine. To pull this off, they needed more than just a vat of oil. They needed the gear to survive the transition between the tesseract's comfort and the moon's cold indifference. The suits. Sam pulled two pressure-modified speculative suits from the lockers. They weren't the bulky white marshmallows of the Apollo era. These were sleek, matte black skins layered with liquid crystal sensors, and reinforced with a weave that could withstand both vacuum and the crushing G-forces of an MFD-driven jump. The airlock modification. Biff began rerouting the hydroponic plumbing. "I am installing a secondary bypass, Sam. This will allow us to vent the THC oil directly onto the hull's emitter plates. The S-Crab unit will then have to spread the coating evenly. It will be furious." Double quote. The bath, the laboratory's deep soak tank, was prepped. It was a pressurized cylinder filled with a golden, translucent liquid that shimmered with a faint, bioluminescent glow. It was designed for droid maintenance, but tonight, it would be a sanctuary for a man, a machine, and a very confused silver-gray cat if Chloe Klops decided to follow. "Sam," Angel said, her hand resting on the airlock lever. "If we're doing this, we're doing it now." The Watchers haven't replied yet, which means they are either arguing about the bill or they've already been compromised. Double quote. "Quig 1, to the bathroom," Sam commanded, as the tuxedo cat trotted toward the securest part of the ship. "Biff, prime the MFD ring. Set the destination for the Delport crater rim. Let's see if the moon god likes the smell of Maui's finest." The 0-point generator let out a long, low whine that climbed into the ultrasonic. Outside, the S-Crab unit let out one final, sarcastic click before the Astra began to bleed into the darkness of the upper atmosphere. Chapter 5. The transition from secret stealth craft to interstellar tincture was finally complete. Outside, the S-Crab unit was a frantic blur of spindly legs, its Morse code taps against the hull now muffled by the thick, golden viscosity of the THC oil. It wasn't just cleaning anymore. It was frosting a cake made of black budget military secrets, and its grumbling had reached a rhythmic, sulky cadence. Inside the tesseract, Sam was preparing for the long dark in his own way. He stood by the auto roller, a polished chrome device that hummed with the precision of a Swiss watch. He fed it a handful of speculative strain buds, sticky, emerald green, and smelling like a forest fire in a candy shop. The machine whirred, and in seconds, a dozen perfectly tapered joints dropped into his case. "Survival gear," Sam muttered, tucking a smoke behind his ear. "Oxygen is for the body, Biff. This is for the part of me that has to look a billion-year-old God in the eye without blinking." Double quote. The 100,000-word revelation. Biff stood at the main console, his synth skin shimmering under the laboratory's amber lights. His optical sensors were moving at a frantic pace, processing the massive data dump he'd synthesized from the Apollo 20 telemetry, and every obscure deep web resource the Watchers hadn't managed to scrub. "Sam, Angel, I have completed the preliminary manual," Biff announced. His voice was steady, but there was a new, resonant frequency in his vocal processor that hinted at awe. 100,000 words, and every one of them is an affront to our current understanding of biology and time. He tapped a key, and a holographic image of the Sovereign-class vessel materialized in the center of the room. It wasn't just a ship. As the god rod in the scanner hummed its ukulele tune, the hologram began to peel back layers of the lunar wreck. "It isn't a derelict, Sam," Biff said, his blue eyes pulsing. "It's an ecosystem, a biotechnological organism that has been dormant for approximately 1.2 billion years. It's not built of parts, it's grown from intent. It defies every law of entropy we know. It hasn't been decaying on the moon, it's been hibernating." The room went silent, save for the low thrum of the zero-point reactor. Even the cats had stopped their prowling. Chloe Klopp sat perfectly still, her golden eyes fixed on the god rod, which was now vibrating so fast it appeared to be in two places at once. "A billion years," Angel whispered, leaning against the oak desk ship. "We're looking at the gardener who planted the forest. Sam, we're not just looking at." "And the gardener just realized someone stole his trowel," Sam said, patting his pocket for a lighter. "Physics is a local law, Biff. Apparently, in the rest of the neighborhood, it's more of a suggestion. Let's jump. I want to see this ecosystem before it decides the Earth needs a new coat of paint." Sam climbed into the pressurized oil bath, the golden liquid rising to his chin. It felt like warm silk. Biff submerged beside him, his internal cooling fans slowing to a meditative hum. "Initiating translunar injection," Biff's voice echoed through the fluid. "Sam, reality is about to get slippery. Keep your eyes closed." With a silent, gravity-folding lurch, the TR-3B Astra vanished from the Maui skies, leaving nothing behind but a faint scent of plumeria and a very annoyed cleaning spider. The jump to the moon was a kaleidoscope of velvet and gold. Submerged in the THC oil bath, Sam felt the tesseract expand until he was no longer a man in a ship, but a single note in a song played by a giant. The speculative strain metabolites in the oil didn't just dampen his frequency, they turned his consciousness into a liquid state. He felt the urge to grab the ukulele and belt out a haunting rendition of Hill Law. But the oil made his vocal cords feel like string cheese, so he settled for a soulful, internal hum that vibrated through his molars. Beside him, Biff was the picture of robotic zen. The oil acted as a massive heat sink for his overclocked processors, allowing him to parse the billion-year-old manual while his chassis shimmered like a polished doubloon. Back on Maui, the tesseract had grown quiet. Angel had stepped back through the portal, taking the silver-grey terror Chloe Klops with her. She knew Sam. She knew the moon was a place for high-tech detectives and droids, not for a wife and a cat with a taste for diplomatic incidents. Quig 1, however, remained. He was curled in the crook of a plumeria tree branch, his tuxedo fur dusted with yellow pollen, dreaming of the ultimate bathroom escort across the Sea of Tranquility. The Watchers' Council, somewhere under London. Deep beneath the cobblestones of a city that had forgotten its own magic, a group of men sat in a room that smelled of old parchment and cold iron. This was the Council of the Watchers, a circle of knights whose armor was now bespoke suits. but whose eyes still held the steely glint of those who had guarded the Grail. Monson and Lloyd, the primary liaisons for the Sam Tracer project, stood before the high table. "He's gone," Monson said, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. "The TR-3B vanished from Maui radar 4 minutes ago. Thermal bloom suggests a translunar trajectory." Double quote. The Grand Watcher, a man whose face looked like a map of the Crusades, tapped a signet ring against the table. "And we did not authorize this." "We said nothing, sir," Lloyd replied, adjusting his glasses. "We knew that a no to Tracer is simply a yes with a delayed fuse. If we told him to stay, he'd have hot-wired the tesseract and gone anyway. This way, the liability is his. If he dents that hull or scrapes the MFD ring on a lunar spire," the Grand Watcher mused, "he's grounded. We'll strip him of his commission, and leave him to write his surfing annuals in a one-bedroom apartment in Kihei." "And if he finds what the God Rod is looking for?" Monson asked. The council went silent. The knights exchanged glances, sharp, rusted, but still dangerous. "Then disclosure isn't a choice we make anymore," the Grand Watcher whispered. "It's a rescue mission." The TR-3B Astra suddenly lurched. The golden oil rippled. Through the external sensors, the pitch-black sky was replaced by the blinding, stark white of the lunar surface. They were hovering over the rim of the Delport crater, and the billion-year-old biotech below was beginning to pulse in time with Sam's heartbeat. Chapter 6. The descent into the Delport crater was a silent ballet of gravity and gold. The TR-3B Astra, dripping with its specialized THC oil coating, didn't just land, it merged with the lunar shadow. To the naked eye, the craft was a shimmering ghost. To the ancient sensors of the Sovereign-class vessel below, it was something much stranger. The billion-year-old seed stirred in its regolith cradle. Its internal logic, forged in an era before the first Earth-bound lung drew a breath, began to process the incoming data. It didn't see a military scout or a threat. Its sensory arrays, attuned to the music of the spheres, received a harmonic chord, a messy, beautiful frequency of a super-stoned human male and a localized cluster of 6 feline biosignatures, each vibrating with varying degrees of domestic indifference. The Atlas vessel pulsed once, a deep subaudible thrum that rippled the dust for miles. It recognized the resonance of the God Rod inside the tesseract. It sensed no malice in the ukulele blues or the sleeping tuxedo cat. The planetary gardener let the lander land. Sam stepped out of the oil bath, the golden liquid sliding off his matte black pressure suit like water off a duck's back. He felt light, not just because of the one-stroke sixth gravity, but because his mind was currently a kite flying in a hurricane of cosmic insight. He grabbed his fedora, which had been specially treated for vacuum exposure, and jammed it onto his head. "Biff," Sam rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves in the suit's comms for us. "It's like it knows I've got the smokes. It's opening the door. I highly doubt its primary motivation is nicotine, Sam," Biff replied, stepping out of the vat and checking his primary actuators. "However, the artifact is now projecting a literal welcome mat of coherent light leading from our airlock to the main dorsal sphincter of the Atlas vessel. It appears your music has earned us a VIP pass." Double quote. The Garden of the Ancients. Outside the viewing port, the lunar surface wasn't the dead, grey wasteland of the history books. Under the influence of the seed, the Delport crater had begun to transform. Crystals of metallic hydrogen were sprouting from the dust like frozen flowers, and the faint, shimmering atmosphere, a thin veil of oxygen and neon, was being exhaled by the ship's biovents. Sam checked his belt. Tricorder, checked. Ukulele, secure in its vacuum-sealed case. The God Rod, singing a frantic, joyful G major. Quig 1 is still asleep in the plumeria tree, Sam noted, looking back into the tesseract. "Keep the internal pressure stable, Biff. If the cats wake up on the moon, I want them to think they're still in Lahaina." Sam cycled the airlock. As the outer door slid open, the silence of the moon hit him, a silence so loud it felt like a physical weight. He stepped onto the dust, his boots leaving glowing prints in the oil-slicked regolith. Directly ahead, the sovereign vessel loomed like a mountain of living obsidian, its surface shifting and rippling like a sea of dark glass. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was a billion years overdue for a conversation. The oil bath was no longer just a luxury, it was the ultimate camouflage. Biff, ever the perfectionist, didn't just spray Sam down. He gripped Sam by the shoulders and dunked him entirely back into the golden vat. When Sam emerged, he looked like a bronze statue cast in liquid light, the THC oil clinging to his matte black suit in a shimmering, frequency-dampening membrane. Biff reached over and delicately placed the vacuum-sealed fedora atop Sam's helmet. "Style is a survival trait, Sam," Biff remarked, before turning to his own preparations. The metamaterial overalls. Biff stepped into a pair of classic protective overalls made of a metamaterial weave. A fabric that didn't just block radiation, it manipulated it. Thermal inversion, it absorbed the 250 degrees Fahrenheit lunar sunlight and converted it into internal battery power for his actuators. Gravitic leveling, the weave acted as a localized anchor, ensuring Biff wouldn't go spinning off into the black if he tripped on a jagged rock. The human mask, to the casual observer, or the ancient censors of a moon god. Biff appeared as a humble 1950s worker, his synthetic skin glowing with the remnants of his own oil bath, his own fedora perched perfectly atop his cranial unit. The Sentinel's greeting. As they stepped onto the lunar dust, the sheer scale of the sovereign-class vessel hit them. It was a mountain of obsidian and bioluminescent veins, looming larger than 10 cliffs stacked end to end. It felt less like a ship, and more like a continent that had decided to take a nap. Suddenly, the ground vibrated. A sentinel, a multi-limbed construct of floating, interlocking geometric shapes rose from the regolith. It didn't have eyes, it had frequency apertures that pulsed with a cold, white light. "Wait," Biff commanded, his hand held high. "It's scanning for intent." Double quote. Biff didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he adjusted his internal vocal processor and projected a pure 432 Hz harmonic signal. The sound shouldn't have traveled in a vacuum, but the seed's localized atmosphere carried the tone like a crystal bell. The effect was instantaneous. The Sentinel's cold white light flickered, then softened into an iridescent purple-blue glow. It began to rotate slowly, mirroring the rhythm of Sam's heartbeat. "It's the god tone," Sam whispered through the comms, his voice thick with the elevated state of his oil-soaked suit. "It knows we're not here to prune the hedges. It thinks we're the music." The Sentinel lowered itself, its floating segments forming a bridge that led directly into the dark, pulsating iris of the Atlas vessel's main hatch. "After you, Sam," Biff said, his fedora tipping slightly in the lunar wind that shouldn't exist. "Try not to smoke that joint until we're sure the atmosphere in there isn't 90% hydrogen. I'd prefer not to be part of a lunar fireworks display." The regolith crunched beneath their boots with a sound that felt more like a vibration in the bones than a noise in the air. As they neared the mountainous obsidian hull, a giant shimmering round aperture spiraled open, the edges of the metal dissolving into light like a digital iris. It wasn't a mechanical door, it was a biological invitation. "It's been waiting," Sam breathed, his voice a gravelly echo in his helmet. Through the visor of his oil-slicked suit, the world was a high-definition fever dream. As they crossed the threshold, the interior of the Sovereign-class vessel didn't just contain space, it breathed it. To Sam, whose consciousness was currently expanded by the speculative strain, the walls weren't solid. They were pulsating tapestries of bioluminescent veins, flowing with a liquid light that shifted from deep indigo to a warm, welcoming gold. He could see the energy moving, a visible heartbeat of a billion-year-old ecosystem. Biff stood perfectly still, his metamaterial overalls shimmering as they adjusted to the internal radiation of the ship. His optical sensors whirred, capturing the rhythmic flicker of the walls. "It's not just light, Sam," Biff reported, his voice smooth and resonant. "The pulsing is a complex series of harmonic oscillations. I'm running a real-time Fourier transform on the light bursts." Biff's internal display began to scroll with rapid-fire data. He tilted his head, his beige fedora casting a sharp shadow against the glowing floor. "It's a welcome frequency, Sam. Specifically, It's a localized handshake in the 432 Hz to 528 Hz range. The ship is literally tuning its internal environment to match our biorhythms. It is remarkably polite for an ancient terraforming engine. Double quote. Nice of them to fix the gravity, Sam muttered, feeling his boots plant firmly on the floor. He reached up, his gloved hand hovering near the joint behind his ear. And the air smells like nothing, not even the void, just clean, too clean. Sam, Biff cautioned, the god rod in the tesseract is currently hitting a high-pitched C note. I believe we are being summoned to the bridge, or the brain. In this architecture, they are likely the same thing. As they moved deeper into the exotic heart of the seed, the path ahead began to form itself out of the floor translucent ribs of light, arching over them like the nave of a cathedral grown from stardust. The deeper they marched into the sovereign-class Leviathan, the more the architecture began to resemble anatomy. The archways weren't built, they were grown, rigged with a material that felt like a cross between ivory and fiber optics. Finally, they stood before it, the central spire. It was a titanic pillar of translucent crystal that stretched from the floor into an infinite, pulsing darkness above. At its base sat a gigantic entranceway, a yawning portal that looked like the mouth of a mechanical god. That's a lot of real estate, Sam muttered, his elevated state making the scale of the core feel personal, as if the ship were leaning in to whisper a secret. Through the gloom of the inner core, Sam squinted. Beyond the portal, the geometric lines of the ship dissolved into something organic. Biff, tell me I'm not hallucinating. Is that a forest? Biff stepped forward, his metamaterial overalls shimmering as he overrode his standard sensors. My tricorder is currently a golden paperweight thanks to your tincture camouflage, Sam. I shall switch to direct ocular analysis. Biff's eyes flared with a brilliant, clinical white light. He stood perfectly still, his head micro-adjusting as he scanned the darkness with focal precision vision. It is indeed a botanical environment, Sam, Biff reported, his voice dropping into a register of pure technical awe. But the trees are not biological in the Terran sense. They are quantum arboreal structures. They are breathing light and exhaling structured data. Biff tilted his head back, inhaling the air through his intake vents to perform a direct chemical breakdown. The air is perfectly breathable, Sam, Biff concluded, his sensors dimming back to their normal blue. In fact, it is chemically superior to anything found on Earth since the Cretaceous period. The 4% particulate matter appears to be a biotechnological interface. It isn't just air, it's a medium for thought. Double quote. Sam reached up and finally plucked the joint from behind his ear. He looked at the towering trees of the inner core, their crystalline leaves shimmering with the same iridescent purple-blue as the sentinel outside. A billion-year-old forest on the moon? Sam whispered to see if this air can handle a little Maui logic. I think it's time for a smoke, Biff. I need. The golden-coated fedora tumbled through the thin lunar exhale, landing with a silent, low-gravity bounce on the mossy floor of the biotech forest. Sam didn't even look down. His movements were fluid, guided by the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the ship's welcome pulse. Is the air breathable if I take off this helmet, you say, Biff? Sam asked, though the locking mechanism was already hissing. Technically, Sam, the chemical composition is. Pop hiss. The seal broke. Sam swung the helmet in his hand like a bucket of salt water, his lungs bracing for the cold bite of a vacuum that never came. Instead, he was hit by a wave of air that felt like a cool silk sheet. It tasted of rain on hot stone and something ancient, the scent of a library that had been closed since the stars were young. He stood there for a second, his hair slightly damp from the oil bath humidity, blinking at the towering crystalline trees. The etheric spores in the air caught the light of his suit, swirling around him like curious fireflies. Breathable, Sam exhaled, his voice no longer a radio crackle but a rich, baritone ring in the vast chamber. It's better than breathable. It's intoxicating. He reached for the backup joint, now easily accessible without the matte black barrier of the suit's neck ring. He tucked it between his lips, a swagger returning to his shoulders that only a man in a billion-year-old lunar forest could possess. Then, his face fell. He patted his thighs. He patted his chest. His hands slid over the oil-slicked meter material of the exterior suit. "Dagnabit, Biff," Sam groaned, the joint bobbing as he spoke. "My lighter. It's in my inside pocket. Inside the suit. That's what you get for being high and suiting up. I've got the best smoke in the galaxy and no way to spark it." Biff turned, his optical sensors whirring as they focused on Sam's predicament. The droid's fedora was still perfectly level, untouched by the chaos of Sam's clumsy gear management. "A fascinating oversight, Sam," Biff remarked, his voice smooth in the pressurized air. "A master detective undone by a layer of protective polymers. However, you are currently standing inside a biotechnological entity that responds to resonant intent." Biff gestured toward the central spire, where a vein of pure ultraviolet energy was pulsing just inches from Sam's elbow. "Perhaps," Biff suggested with a touch of mechanical wit, "for a light. You could ask the billion-year-old god the air inside the core wasn't just oxygen. It was a pressurized history lesson." With every breath, Sam felt the etheric spores colonizing his synapses, untethering his sense of now from the ticking clock on Earth. The colors of the forest seemed to bleed into the edges of his vision, vibrant magentas and deep teals, that shouldn't exist in the spectrum of a man who hadn't slept in 3 dimensions. "Quick, Biff," Sam said, his voice sounding like it was being filtered through a cathedral's reverb. "Check the chronometer in Betty. Check our local drift against the watch's clock. I feel like my internal watch is spinning backwards." Biff's eyes flared white as he established a remote link with the Astra's central nervous system. "Calculating temporal variance, Sam. Due to the proximity of the zero-point core in the sovereign vessel's localized gravity well, Earth is currently 4 hours and 12 minutes ahead of our relative experience. We are effectively walking through a yesterday that hasn't happened yet." They rounded the base of the massive crystal spire, and the forest gave way to a clearing of polished, obsidian glass. The pilot's nexus. Directly ahead lay the control sanctum. It wasn't a cockpit of buttons and dials, it was a vast, amphitheater-sized dome. In the center sat an elevated platform, a throne of liquid light that seemed to wait for a master. "Unmistakable," Sam whispered, the unlit joint still bobbing between his lips. "Who lives in a tesseract? This is a shocker." Even for a guy. Biff looked up, his sensors scanning the dizzying heights of the central monolith. "My research, the 100,000 words I synthesized confirmed the mechanism, Sam. The architecture here is a conscious amplifier. That slab above us. It's not just a pillar, it's 333 feet of solid, resonant crystal that acts as a broadcast antenna for the pilot's will." "The will?" Sam asked, leaning back until his neck cricked. "The ship doesn't have a steering wheel, Sam," Biff explained, gesturing to the monolith that pierced the dome miles above. "The pilot sits there, enters a state of hyperintention, and the ship amplifies that thought across the tesseract of the solar system. The pilot is the engine. Their consciousness becomes the gravity that moves the world." Sam looked from the empty throne of light to the towering 333-foot slab. He felt a tug in his gut, the same magnetic pull the god Rod had given him back in the lab. "A billion years of waiting for someone to think a thought loud enough to wake it up," Sam said. He looked at Biff, then back at the throne. "You think I am loud enough, Biff?" "Sam, your intent is currently flavored with a speculative grade tincture in a lost pair of surfing annuals," Biff replied, his voice dry. "But as the only super-stoned male in the vicinity, you are the most resonant biosignature we have. The ship is practically humming your ukulele riff." The awe of the ancient forest curdled into the cold, sharp clarity of the forensic investigation. As they stepped onto the pilot's nexus, the golden amber light of the ship suddenly shifted to a clinical, morning violet. "Biff," Sam whispered, his voice steadying. "Look at the floor." The throne of light was scarred. Deep, jagged gouges, molecular tears in the living lattice radiated outward from the center. This wasn't a departure, it was an abduction. They stood at the exact point where the pilot had been forcibly, violently extracted from the ship's nervous system. Nearby, A shattered housing of metallic hydrogen lay in ruins, the jagged negative space where the god rod had been snapped off during the Astra extraction a billion years ago. "This is it," Sam said, the unlit joint forgotten in his hand. "The crime scene of the millennium. Someone didn't just find this ship, they mugged it." Biff's optical sensors clicked rapidly as he began documenting the scene. His metamaterial overalls reflecting the violet light in forensic bursts. "Documenting the molecular shear patterns now, Sam," Biff reported. "The energy required to sever a neural link this deep, the pilot didn't just leave. They were torn out of reality." Double quote. A comparative tech analysis. Sam paced the perimeter, his elevated state allowing him to see the layers of the tech. "None of this is on Betty, Biff. Not the biovanes, not the intent engines. Except for the tesseract and the Chronos device. We're playing with matches, and these guys were bottling suns." He thought of their own jury-rigged Chronos tech back on the TR-3B. The Biff method, using a Chronos field to speed up time in the lab, to grow a cold-pull engine from an exotic seed. The tracer method, a Chronos arrest device used to speed up Sam's personal time in the workday, turning a 1-hour deadline into a 12-hour workday. "Probably gave me more than a few grey hairs and a risk of cosmic tumors," Sam muttered. "It bought me time. This ship, though, it doesn't just use time. It contains it, but..." The cascading pillars. Sam's eyes drifted past the pilot seat toward the far perimeter of the dome. In the distance, towering pillars stretched from the floor to the ceiling. But they weren't stone. They were shimmering, translucent cylinders of cascading liquid falling forever but never hitting the ground. "Biff," Sam said, pointing a trembling finger distance, "what the hell are those?" "Look at the waterfalls. Those pillars in the." Biff turned, his focal vision zooming in on the shimmering vertical torrents. "Those are not water, Sam. My sensors are detecting zero H2O. They are zero-point laminar cascades." "They are time wells," Biff explained, his voice hushed. "The liquid is a superfluid state of chronons. The ship uses those falls to stabilize the tesseract's interior dimensions. It's a closed-loop temporal cooling system. If we get too close, our personal timelines might start to unravel." Sam stared at the cascading light, the waterfalls of time itself falling through a billion-year-old forest on the moon. "A crime scene in a clock shop," Sam sighed. "Biff, I think the gardeners didn't just leave their trowel behind. I think they left the whole greenhouse running, and someone stole the gardener." Double quote. Chapter 7. The Chronon waterfalls didn't just fall. They hummed with the weight of a billion years. Every droplet of the shimmering superfluid was a captured moment, a microscopic archive of the tesseract's long, lonely vigil. Standing near them felt like standing at the edge of forever. The air grew heavy with the taste of old lightning and the static of uncounted centuries. The forensic memory dump. Biff approached a nearby crystalline terminal that pulsed with a rhythmic, morning violet light. He didn't use a keyboard. He placed his polished, synth-skin hand against the living lattice. His internal processors, slick with the remnants of the THC oil, interfaced directly with the ship's biotech nervous system. Accessing the deep archive subsectors, Biff announced. "The memory banks are overwhelming, Sam. It's a billion-year time-lapse of the lunar surface, but I've found the anomaly. I'm isolating the Astra extraction event now." A holographic projection flickered into life in the center of the hall. It wasn't a grainy video, it was a high-fidelity reconstruction of light and sound. They watched as the pilot, a being of shimmering, translucent geometry, was suddenly enveloped by a violent, dark matter vortex. The god rod snapped like a twig, the neural link screaming in a frequency that made Sam's teeth ache even a billion years later. The pilot didn't fight, they were simply erased from the seat. The pilot's nexus, a poem report. Sam, meanwhile, was hunched over the pilot's throne. He had pulled back his sleeve to reveal a poem Chronos watch, a high-end, custom-modded piece of wrist tech that was half detective tool, half status symbol. He tapped the glass, and a tiny laser mic began recording his observations. "Report for the archive," Sam muttered, his voice gravelly. "Subject, Pilot interface, sovereign class vessel. The seed. The seating isn't ergonomic, it's empathetic. The surface is a semi-liquid crystalline mesh that likely conforms to the pilot's biosignature upon contact. He leaned in closer, the unlit joint still behind his ear, his elevated sensors noting the fine details. The controls aren't tactile. There are peripheral wells filled with a substance that looks like liquid mercury, but behaves like a neural fluid. I'm seeing residual signatures of the will, faint, glowing filaments that haven't quite faded. It looks like the ship was mid-command when the extraction happened. A planetary scale command. Double quote. Biff, Sam said, looking up from his watch. The ship wasn't just sitting here. It was working. The pilot was in the middle of a hyper-intention sequence when they were taken. They were trying to tell the Earth something. Biff turned from the holographic crime scene, his blue eyes flashing. The recording confirms it, Sam. The gardeners weren't just watching. They were preparing a harvest. And whoever took the pilot, they didn't want that harvest to happen. Double quote. End Part 1. Introduction to Part 2, The Dulce Resonance. A Sam Tracer Adventure. There is a generally accepted rule in the cosmos, that the profound and the absurd should be kept in entirely separate dimensions. In this second installment of the Cold Pool, that rule is comprehensively shattered, rolled up, and smoked. Welcome to Part 2, The Dulce Resonance, Chapters 8 to 16, where deep-time astrophysics collides head-on with terrestrial black ops and perfectly cured, zero-gravity trichomes. When we left freelance astronaut Sam Tracer and his impeccably dressed, iridescent synthetic partner, Biff, they had just reached the hull of the Atlas, a billion-year-old sovereign class seed vessel parked dead in the center of the lunar Delport crater. What they find inside is not a dusty tomb of ancient engineers, but a vibrant, Base 144 biological nerve center. The ship is awake. It is watching. And its rightful pilot hasn't been murdered. He has been kidnapped by the American military-industrial complex and stuffed into a subterranean magnetic vacuum sphere in Dulce, New Mexico. This arc asks a fundamental question: how do you rescue an ancient cosmic deity from the most heavily guarded black site on Earth, without triggering a localized dark matter collapse? The answer, as it turns out, requires a generous application of Maui logic. As the universe's 10-billion-year-old AI sentinels watch in exhausted disbelief, Sam and Biff prove that the ultimate defense against the mind-shattering ontological shock of alien mathematics is simply being heavily saturated in terrestrial THC, armed with a pocket-dimensional weed whacker, a Zippo lighter, and a freshly harvested cutting of the universe's most philosophically potent flora. Our heroes are about to execute the greatest, non-lethal, and deeply disrespectful heist in human history. They aren't going to break the pilot out of the Archuleta Mesa with laser fire or quantum torpedoes. They are going to drop out of orbit, hijack the facility's HVAC system, and hotbox the entire deep state establishment. Prepare for a journey through frictionless gravitational slip waves, ancient feline guardians, automated sarcasm, and the undeniable interconnectedness of the multiverse. The universe is a unified frequency, and the TR-3B Betsy is about to drop the heaviest baseline New Mexico has ever seen. Chapter 8. The violet morning light of the pilot's nexus casts long, sepulchral shadows across the crystalline floor. The only sound was the endless, hushed rushing of the Cromon waterfalls in the distance, the sound of eternity leaking a faucet. Sam stood near the shattered throne, the unlit joint still tucked behind his ear, a constant, nagging reminder of his lighter deficit in a room full of billion-year-old energy. He took another deep lungful of the ship's atmosphere. The etheric spores tasted less like dust and more like memories, but beneath that ancient petrichor, there was something else. Something sticky. While Sam sniffed the air like a bloodhound at a botanical garden, Biff was busy with mundane maintenance in a sacred space. He had pulled a metamaterial rag from the pocket of his iridescent overalls, and was diligently wiping down his standard issue watcher tricorder. The THC oil from the stealth jump had turned the delicate sensor array into a golden, blurry mess. Darn speculative residue, Biff muttered, his vocal processor tuned low. Of my optical sensors are currently registering the universe as deep-fried. 72% as he vigorously polished the emitter lens. Biff's peripheral sensors, the ones tuned to motion rather than spectrum, caught a flicker in the deep gloom beyond the pilot's throne. It wasn't a machine. It moved with a liquid, predatory grace that defied the rigid geometry of the ship. A feline shape, darker than the shadows it prowled through, paused near a cluster of glowing bioveins. Two eyes, luminescent green like old radium, blinked slowly at them. "Sam," Biff said quietly, not stopping his polishing. "Biological entity, feline configuration. We have company, 6 o'clock low." Sam didn't turn immediately. He was too focused on the olfactory puzzle that murder fluff stow away. "Is it Chloe Klops?" "Did negative. The spectral signature doesn't match any terrestrial domestic breed. It appears to be indigenous and unthreatening. It's merely observing us, judging us, perhaps." Sam finally turned, catching the flash of green eyes before the shape melted back behind a crystalline pillar. "A shipcat," Sam mused, a grin spreading across his face beneath the brim of his fedora. "A billion years old and they still needed someone to knock things off shelves. I like these gardeners more and more." He turned his attention back to the air. The realization hit him hard, aided by the lingering effects of the oil bath. He recognized this smell. It was the same dense, resinous scent he'd engineered back on the Astra when he routed the air scrubbers through his private hydroponic stash to mask the smell of ozone and secrets. "Biff," Sam said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Second. Smell the air. Really smell it. Beneath the old library smell." "Forget the crime scene for a." Biff finished wiping the tricorder. The screen flickered to life, crisp and clear for the first time since they left Maui. "Olfactory sensors engaged. I am detecting high concentrations of complex terpenes, caryophyllene oxide, and, my word." Sam pointed a finger toward the towering, dark forest structures that surrounded the central nexus area. "It smells like my lab on a Saturday night, Biff. Only bigger. Much, much bigger." Biff held the tricorder up, sweeping it toward the dense biobotanical gloom. The reading scrolled wildly across the small screen. "Your intuition is shockingly accurate, Sam," Biff confirmed, his tone a mixture of scientific disbelief and admiration. "The atmospheric analysis indicates that approximately 40% of the ship's oxygen generation is coming from a specific botanical source. According to this spectral match, Sam, the Atlas vessel isn't just a ship. It contains a cannabis cultivation sector that is roughly the size of Rhode Island." Double quote. Chapter 9. Sam let out a strained grunt, his shoulder joints popping as he executed a contortionist maneuver that would have made a Houdini wince. With his fedora clamped firmly on his head, he had managed to shove his gloved hand down through the flexible, oil-slicked neck ring of his meter-material spacesuit, digging blindly toward the breast pocket of his inner jacket. "Come to Papa," Sam wheezed. His hand re-emerged from the collar, triumphantly clutching a battered silver Zippo. He didn't waste a second. He flicked the lighter open, the sharp clack hiss echoing loudly in the massive, quiet expanse of the pilot's nexus. He brought the flame to the joint, took a long, slow draw, and exhaled a thick cloud of grey smoke that immediately began to mingle with the ancient, iridescent etheric spores floating in the air. Sam rolled his shoulders, feeling the deep, resonant hum of the ship amplify the Maui logic now coursing through his system. "All right," he said, his voice smooth and expansive. "Hey Biff, check the chronometer drift again. How many Earth hours have actually passed since we parked Betty in the dirt?" He took another drag, pointing the glowing ember of the joint toward the dark, sprawling tree line of the core. "Because if we've got the time, I think a little stroll is in order. Maybe meander down to that cannabis tier. It feels deeply disrespectful not to sample a billion-year-old local harvest. For science, obviously." Biff didn't immediately answer. Sam turned, expecting a dry lecture on cross-contamination, but Biff's optical sensors had shifted from their default, calm blue to a sharp, tactical amber. The synthetic detective wasn't looking at the chronometer, nor was he looking at the Rhode Island-sized greenhouse. He was staring intensely at a console that had just bloomed into life along the shattered periphery of the pilot's throne. "Sam," Biff said, his voice stripped of its usual conversational warmth, dropping into a precise, clipped cadence. "I believe the botanical tour will have to be indefinitely postponed." Sam sauntered over, a trail of smoke following him like a tail. As he approached the console, the floor beneath it reacted to their proximity, projecting a crisp, three-dimensional holographic display into the air. It wasn't alien geometry. It was a map. Specifically, it was a topographic projection of a landmass that was undeniably North America, though the coastline showed the subtle variations of deep-time continental drift. "Is the ship watching Earth?" Sam asked, the high suddenly taking a backseat to cold, hard adrenaline. "Not just watching, Sam. It is tracking a specific resonance," Biff replied, leaning in closer to the light. Pulsing violently on the holographic map, right over the American Southwest, was a bright red geometric marker, a circle enclosing a perfect hexagon. It wasn't a passive blip, it was an active alarm, bleeding a harsh crimson light across Biff's iridescent overalls. "Let me guess," Sam muttered, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the general geography. "That's not a marker for a cosmic tourist trap." "Hardly," Biff confirmed, his internal processes whirring as he cross-referenced the ship's projection with his own Earthside databases. "If I am reading the spatial coordinates correctly, and I assure you, my geodetic arrays are flawless, that red hexagonal perimeter is locked onto the Archuleta Mesa." Sam took a slow, funnel drag from his joint, the glow illuminating his grim expression. "Dulce." "Precisely, Sam. Dulce, New Mexico," Biff said, turning to look at his partner. "The site of the most heavily rumored deep underground bioengineering facility on the planet. And according to this billion-year-old control deck, something down there just triggered a critical warning." Sam squinted through a fresh cloud of smoke at the holographic display. The red hexagon over New Mexico was pulsing rhythmically, but the data cascading around the edges of the continental map was a visual migraine. It was a torrential downpour of alien geometry, shifting fractal patterns, bioluminescent symbols, and what looked like a frankly terrifying amount of math. "I don't suppose there's a help screen or a tutorial menu hidden in there?" Sam asked, gesturing with the glowing tip of his joint toward the console. "Maybe a billion-year-old frequently asked questions." Biff's optical sensors scanned the scrolling data at a rate of several million calculations per second, his iridescent overalls reflecting the crimson glow of the alarm. "Negative, Sam," Biff replied, his tone perfectly flat. "The interface operates on a base 144 numbering system, layered with a form of quantum-entangled syntax. The gardeners did not believe in user manuals. They operated on the assumption that if you were sitting in this chair, you already possessed a planetary-scale intellect." Double quote. Sam took another long, slow puff of the joint. The harsh light of the Dulce alarm still painted the room red, but the dense, resinous smoke filling his lungs was doing its job. The initial spike of adrenaline smoothed out into a focused, elevated calm. His Maui logic was coming fully online. "Okay," Sam exhaled, a thick plume of gray smoke briefly obscuring the North American continent. "Let's think about this. A billion-year-old ship doesn't just randomly start flashing a red hex over a subterranean military base in New Mexico. Not today, not right while we happen to be standing here." He turned slowly, looking back at the shattered, violet-lit throne, the exact spot where the violent molecular tear had occurred during the Astra extraction. He pointed the joint at the jagged, empty housing where the god rod used to sit. "Biff," Sam said, his voice dropping into the quiet gravel of a detective who just found the murder weapon. "What if that alarm isn't a warning about what Earth is doing naturally? What if it's related to the crime scene right here?" Biff froze, his synthetic processors stalling for a fraction of a microsecond, as he cross-referenced Sam's intuitive leap with the base 144 data stream. "The resonance hypothesis. An extraordinary deduction, Sam," Biff said, his optical sensors flaring from amber back to a brilliant, calculating white. "I am filtering the Dulce alarm's telemetry through the molecular shear patterns we recorded at the throne. Biff's polished hands hovered over the biosynthetic console, manipulating the light streams without touching them. The holographic map shifted, bringing up a secondary wave of data. "You are entirely correct," Biff confirmed, looking up from the console. "The alarm is not tracking a human military experiment. It is tracking a piece of its own missing anatomy. The exact frequency of the god rod that was snapped off this console a billion years ago. It is currently broadcasting from deep beneath the Archuleta Mesa." Sam took the joint from his lips, his eyes locked on the pulsing red hexagon. "So whoever mugged the pilot a billion years ago, they didn't just take the tech. They planted it in our backyard." The red glow of the holographic map cast a sinister hue over the shattered pilot's nexus. But as Biff dug deeper into the base 144 data stream, his synthetic hands suddenly stopped moving. The rapid, clinical whirring of his internal processors pitched up an octave, a mechanical sign of genuine shock. "Sam, no. Wait," Biff said, his voice losing its usual unflappable cadence. Sam paused, the joint halfway to his lips. "Wait, what? It's not the hardware." Biff shook his head, his iridescent fedora dipping as he realigned the quantum-entangled syntax floating in the air. He isolated a single, pulsing thread of golden light from the torrent of crimson warning data and expanded it. "The telemetry is significantly more profound than the stolen component, Sam," Biff explained, his optical sensors wide and locked onto the floating gold thread. "I was cross-referencing the frequency of the god rod, but I missed the underlying bioharmonic. This isn't a mechanical ping, it is a consciousness tether." Sam lowered his hand, the smoke curling around his knuckles. "Translate that into Maui logic for me, Biff." "It is not the god rod down there," Biff said, turning his glowing blue eyes towards Sam. "It is God. The biosignature radiating from the Dulce underground facility is a perfect match for the residual molecular memory on this throne. The pilot, the being that was violently extracted from this vessel a billion years ago, it is currently imprisoned beneath the Archuleta Mesa." Sam stared at the pulsing red hexagon over New Mexico. The weight of it was staggering. The U.S. military, or whatever clandestine shadow branch operated at Dulce, wasn't just reverse engineering alien tech. They had a captive deity in the basement. But as the heavy silence stretched on, the elevated THC levels in Sam's bloodstream prompted his engineer's brain to latch onto a secondary, highly practical observation. He took a slow drag from his joint, exhaled, and waved a hand through the edge of the holographic interface. The light rippled like water, soft and perfectly rendered, devoid of any harsh glare or pixelation. "You know," Sam mused, his eyes drifting across the array of alien glyphs, "this computing power is unbelievable. And these screens, they are real nice, very easy on the eyes. No blue light fatigue at all." Biff blinked, taking a moment to process the sheer velocity of Sam's conversational pivot from imprisoned cosmic deity to user interface aesthetics. "I mean it," Sam continued, tapping ash onto the pristine lunar glass floor. "Think about the rig we have back on Betsy. It's all hard light tactical readouts and analog dials. Could you replicate this kind of organic OS aboard the TR-3B? Give her a billion-year-old UI upgrade." Biff straightened his overalls, his tactical focus momentarily giving way to his own engineering pride. OS replication feasibility, Betsy versus the Seed. Replicating a bioluminescent quantum interface aboard our craft presents several unique hurdles, Sam, Biff noted, pacing around the console. The medium, the screens here are not projected light, they are excitable etheric spores suspended in localized chronon fields. To replicate the easy-on-the-eyes effect, Biff would have to cultivate a microcolony of these spores inside the TR-3B's cockpit. The processing power, the Atlas vessel uses a crystalline mycelium network to calculate its space 144 math. The TR-3B relies on a highly advanced, but fundamentally terrestrial, quantum core. The interface method, this console lacks a keyboard because it reads intent. If ported to Betsy, Sam would have to fly the ship purely by thinking about it, a risky proposition when his thoughts are currently drifting between cosmic mysteries and the Rhode Island-sized cannabis tier. However, Biff concluded, a hint of a synthetic smirk playing on his lips, if we can successfully extract a cutting from the biobotanical sector, I could theoretically splice a localized version of this display into Betsy's navigation console. It would certainly reduce your optical strain during deep tesseract jumps. Sam grinned, the Zippo clinking as he slipped it back down his suit collar. Around for a reason, Biff. I knew I kept you. Level 7 of the Dulce underground facility was a masterclass in sterile, terrestrial paranoia. There were no etheric spores here, no cascading chronon waterfalls, and certainly no ambient 432 Hz harmonics. There was only the harsh, buzzing glare of fluorescent lights, and the relentless hum of cooling fans struggling to chill the containment array. In the center of the subterranean laboratories, suspended within a magnetically sealed zero-point vacuum sphere, hung the pilot. To the human scientists working around the clock, the pilot looked less like a biological entity, and more like a captured star dying in slow motion. A shifting, translucent geometric lattice of bruised purple and fractured gold light. They didn't know its name. They didn't understand its biology, but they monitored it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, their clipboards and terrestrial supercomputers trying to measure the infinite with a ruler. They thought the pilot was asleep. They thought the stasis field had severed its connection to the cosmos. They were wrong on both counts. While the pilot's physical matrix was pinned beneath the Archuleta Mesa, its consciousness was vast, deep, and hopelessly entangled with the Sovereign-class vessel, 250,000 miles away on the lunar surface. The pilot was the ship, and the ship was the pilot. Through the quantum tether, the pilot felt the heavy, vibrating thud of the TR-3B settling into the Delport crater. It felt the ship's ancient iris open. It felt the sudden, shocking influx of a wildly intoxicating, localized atmosphere hacking into its pristine botanical sector. And then, it heard the voices. The pilot did not move a single facet of its geometric form inside the Dulce sphere. But its consciousness leaned closer to the audio relays pulsing through the walls of its distant throne room. I mean it. Think about the rig we have back on Betsy. Could you replicate this kind of organic OS aboard the TR-3B? Give her a billion-year-old UI upgrade. The voice was human, wrapped in a thick layer of localized botanical intoxication and dripping with a casual, staggering audacity. If we can successfully extract a cutting from the biobotanical sector, I could theoretically splice a localized version of this display. It would certainly reduce your optical strain. Double quote. The second voice was synthetic, incredibly precise, and terrifyingly capable of actually attempting the horticultural software piracy the human was proposing. In the deep, silent ocean of its captive consciousness, the pilot, a being who had terraformed star systems, who calculated orbital mechanics in base 144, who had spent 1 billion years waiting for a mind vast enough to speak to, experienced a singular, profound moment of cosmic exasperation. Oh, my AI core, the pilot groaned in its mind. They want to strip mine my navigation network because the colors are easy on the eyes. It wasn't a physical sound, but the sheer, condensed weight of the pilot's commiserating sigh rippled down the quantum tether. The energy had to go somewhere. Inside the Dulce laboratories, the magnetic containment sphere shuddered. A microscopic wave of localized gravity rolled through the room. Dr. Aris Thorne, standing by the primary telemetry monitor with a cup of stale coffee, froze. Did you hear that? The other scientists paused, looking up from their readouts. For a fraction of a second, the harsh fluorescent lights overhead violently flickered, dimming to a deep, bruised violet before snapping back to glaring white. The hum of the cooling fans momentarily sounded like a low, resonant cello string. Power grid fluctuation, a technician called out from the far wall, tapping a screen. A microsurge in Sector 4. The subject's vitals are completely flat. It's still under. We just had Dr. Thorne stared at the shimmering geometry trapped in the glass, his coffee cooling in his hand. Right, just the grid. Beneath the mesa, the pilot simply listened to the feed from the moon, bracing itself for whatever the human in the fedora was going to do next. Chapter 10. Sam took a final, thoughtful pull from the joint, the ember glowing fiercely in the violet gloom before he carefully pinched it out and slipped the roach into a sealed pocket. So, that would be a technical no, then, as to fully replicating this computer system, Sam said, waving a hand toward the base 144 bioluminescent array. A hard, highly practical no, Sam, Biff confirmed, his optical sensors tracking the dissipating smoke. Unless you intend to spend the next 4 centuries cultivating a crystalline mycelium network in Betsy's air ducts. I get it, Biff. I hear you, Sam replied, adjusting the brim of his fedora. But I'm just saying, we could compromise. We put aside one of the spare surfboard repair bays in the back of Betsy, and make a go of something as close to it as possible. Strip out the resin racks, install a localized biometric loop, and you're right about the spores, we'd have to keep them contained. Don't want billion-year-old quantum fungus getting into the sex wax. Biff simply stared at him, the synthetic equivalent of a prolonged sigh radiating from his iridescent frame. Converting a surfboard repair bay into a zero-point organic processing core. Naturally, why didn't I think of that? Exactly. It's called vision, buddy, Sam grinned, the Maui logic firing on all cylinders. But then the grin faded, his eyes drifting back to the red hex still pulsing stubbornly over the holographic map of New Mexico. Besides, we have bigger fish to fry now. We know exactly where the pilot is. The ship didn't just give us clues, it handed us the GPS coordinates to a kidnapped cosmic deity. Sam cracked his knuckles, looking out toward the vast, dark expanse of the biobotanical forest. All right, let's hit the greenhouse. Rhode Island is a big state to walk across, though, going to take us hours just to find the good buds. Actually, Sam, Biff interrupted, his gaze suddenly locked onto the crystalline floor beneath their boots. Walking will not be necessary, nor will it take hours. Sam looked down. The pristine, glass-like surface of the floor didn't look any different, but Biff was running his tricorder over a faint, almost invisible seam in the geometry. I was analyzing the floor's structural integrity, Biff explained, his tone shifting back into rapid-fire scientific cadence. But it isn't just a floor. It is a localized transit matrix. The gardeners did not walk across this vessel, Sam. They glided. Biff tapped a sequence on his tricorder, and suddenly, a 2-foot-wide pathway of the floor illuminated beneath them, glowing with a soft, aquamarine light. It stretched out from the pilot's nexus, winding its way straight into the heart of the towering, resin-scented forest. A gravitational slip wave, Biff said, looking up with genuine mechanical awe. Speak English, Biff. Or at least surf jargon. It's a localized, frictionless gravity current, Biff translated smoothly. It manipulates the Higgs field directly beneath our feet. Think of it as an omnidirectional, invisible moving walkway operating in quick mode. You simply step onto the illuminated vector, lean your center of mass in your desired direction, and the ship's gravity carries you there at highly accelerated speeds without generating wind resistance or inertial shear. Sam stared at the glowing blue track, a slow, delighted smile spreading across his face. He looked at Biff, then back to the track. So, it's a billion-year-old, frictionless cosmic longboard. If you insist on applying that specific taxonomy, yes, Biff replied, stepping onto the edge of the blue light. He didn't move his legs, but his iridescent frame smoothly rotated to face the forest. Shall we catch a wave, Sam? The cosmic longboard. Sam adjusted the brim of his fedora, took a deep breath of the terpene-heavy air, and stepped fully onto the glowing aquamarine vector. There was no lurch, no sudden kick of inertia. One moment he was standing still, and the next, he was gliding forward at a rapidly accelerating pace. The ship's localized gravity field perfectly locked his center of mass, carrying him effortlessly over the crystalline floor, without wind resistance to tear at his clothes or dry his eyes. The sensation was entirely surreal, like surfing a perfectly glassed-out wave that never broke, stretching endlessly into the dark. Biff glided right beside him, his posture impossibly straight, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his iridescent overalls, as his optical sensors swept the cavernous, passing environment. The pilot's nexus fell away behind them, replaced by a deep, exotic expanse of biotechnological architecture that defied earthly geometry. They were passing through the ship's massive life support and terraforming arteries, a subterranean landscape of living machinery. Fascinating, Biff narrated, his voice carrying perfectly in the frictionless bubble of the slip wave. On our immediate left, Sam, you will observe a multi-phasic aquifer. Those towering, translucent columns are filtering liquid chronons into the ship's root system. It appears to operate on a principle of capillary action, but on a subatomic level. Sam whistled softly as they zoomed past a series of massive, glowing pulmonary structures that expanded and contracted with the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of the Atlas. And above us, Biff continued, pointing a polished finger toward the vaulted ceiling. That lattice of pulsing violet veins is a quantum-entangled mycelial network. It acts as both the ship's structural reinforcement and its primary databus. It is essentially a living fiber-optic nervous system. It's beautiful, Sam admitted. Watching the alien jungle blur past them didn't believe in hard angles, did they? Everything is grown, not built. The gardeners really precisely, Biff agreed. A perfect synthesis of biology and engineering. It makes RTR-3B look like a rudimentary collection of tin cans and wire by comparison. Sam chuckled, shifting his weight slightly on the slip wave to carve a smooth line around a protruding cluster of glowing bioluminescent flora. The gravity current responded instantly to his intention, banking him effortlessly. Well, don't tell Betsy that. She's sensitive, Sam said. He then reached down to a zippered pouch on his thigh, flashing a wide, highly motivated grin at his synthetic partner. But I've got to tell you, Biff, I am super excited right now. The architecture is mind-blowing, sure, but my priorities are currently botanical. Sam pulled his hand from the pouch, revealing a small, meticulously cleaned titanium travel pipe. It glinted in the aquamarine light of the glide zone. I brought the designated away mission piece, Sam announced, tapping the bowl with his thumb. I'm hoping this Rhode Island-sized tear isn't just a bunch of seedlings. If these gardeners left any cured, billion-year-old samples sitting around, I am absolutely trying them immediately. For the historical record, of course. Biff looked at the small titanium pipe, then back to the rapidly approaching canopy of the cannabis tear, which was now radiating a dense, emerald green light and an overwhelming wave of familiar, heavy aromas. Given the stasis fields preserving the rest of the ship, Sam, Biff noted dryly, I calculate a 98% probability that you are about to encounter the most immaculately cured harvests in the history of the known universe. Double quote. Chapter 11. The highest strain. The aquamarine light of the slipwave gently dimmed, decelerating smoothly as the crystalline floor transitioned into a dark, incredibly rich loamy soil. Sam and Biff stepped off the invisible current, their boots sinking slightly into the earth of the Atlas vessel's vast biobotanical tier. The air here was thick, a heavy, aromatic blanket of pine, citrus, and deep, ancient earth. The towering stalks of the indigenous flora stretched upward like giant redwoods, their canopy glowing with a soft, pulsing emerald bioluminescence that simulated a perfect, eternal high noon sun. Deep in the violet shadows behind them, entirely unseen by human eyes or synthetic optical sensors, the shadow feline melted into the undergrowth. Its radium green eyes blinked slowly, watching the two intruders with a calm, calculating intelligence as they approached the tree line. Sam barely noticed the sheer scale of the forest. His attention was completely captivated by the very first cluster of plants, at the edge of the grove. He leaned in close, the small titanium pipe gripped tightly in his hand, his eyes wide with genuine horticultural reverence. I don't believe it, Sam whispered, reaching out to gently cup a massive, spear-shaped flower. He didn't touch the resin, he just let it hover millimeters from his glove. I thought my own speculative strain back home took some beating. I mean, I've engineered some masterpieces in my time, Biff, but look at this. The bud was practically alien in its perfection. It wasn't just green, it was coated in a layer of trichomes so dense and thick that the entire flower looked frosty white, shimmering with microscopic rainbows under the canopy's light. Globules of pure, Golden terpenes clung to the leaves like morning dew. "It's dripping, Biff," Sam said, leaning his face closer and taking a deep, greedy inhale. He closed his eyes, swaying slightly. "Good Lord, it smells like a pre-smoke smoke. Just breathing near it is elevating my baseline." Biff stepped up beside him, his fedora tilted back as he raised his freshly wiped tricorder. A fan of blue scanning light washed over the frosty white flower. The device chimed softly, processing the complex biological data through its quantum core. "Initiating botanical audit," Biff announced, his tone shifting into clinical precision. "The genetic structure is astounding, Sam. It utilizes a base 144 chromosomal sequence. Those aren't just trichomes you are observing, they are microscopic, zero-point energy batteries. The terpene profile is off the charts, featuring compounds that don't even exist on the periodic table back on Earth." Double quote. Biff lowered the tricorder, turning his glowing blue eyes to his partner. He adjusted his iridescent overalls and delivered his final assessment with absolute, deadpan synthetic sincerity. "Furthermore, Sam, considering our current orbital altitude, and the fact that we are standing inside a billion-year-old sovereign vessel, parked in a lunar crater, I can confidently state that this is, quite literally, the highest strain available." Sam slowly turned his head, staring at the android. A massive, delighted grin broke across his face, and a booming laugh echoed through the ancient alien forest. "Biff," Sam chuckled, patting the android on his metallic shoulder. "Because if you did, that was flawless." "Did you just make a joke?" "I merely state the empirical facts, Sam," Biff replied, though the very faintest hint of a smile seemed to play at the corners of his mechanical mouth. "Now, are you going to pack that titanium pipe? Or are we simply going to stand here and absorb the pre-smoke smoke via osmosis?" Chapter 12. Deep Thoughts in the Canopy. The ancient cannabis garden of the Atlas vessel had not simply survived the billion-year stasis, it had transcended. Without the harsh, crushing limitations of terrestrial gravity, and bathed in the eternal, synthesized emerald noon of the perfect atrium, the plants had achieved a scale that defied human botany. These were not bushes or mere crops, they were towering, ancient timbers. Their stalks had thickened into trunks as wide as old-growth oaks, spiraling upward into a dense, frosty canopy that seemed to brush against the vaulted ceiling of the biosphere. It was a garden that had once been meticulously tended and harvested by the gardeners, but in their billion-year absence, the flora had been left entirely to its own devices to grow, adapt, and refine itself. Standing before the closest gargantuan stalk, Sam felt an undeniable, buzzing presence. The plant was so heavily laden with zero-point trichomes and complex, base 144 terpenes, that it had crossed the threshold from mere vegetation into something bordering on actual sentience. It wasn't plotting or calculating in the human sense, but it was practically vibrating with a living, botanical philosophy. If this towering specimen possessed a mind, it was entirely occupied with deep thoughts, placid, universal wisdom regarding the interconnectedness of all cosmic matter, the slow breathing of the multiverse, and the absolute perfection of simply existing in the light. It radiated a profound, peaceful energy that made Sam hesitate. Plucking a bud from this ancient philosopher tree, with his bare hands, felt less like foraging and more like vandalism. "It feels like I should ask for its permission," Sam whispered, his fedora tilted back as he stared up into the frosty white, dripping lower branches. "I mean, look at it, Biff. This thing knows the secrets of the universe. It's probably contemplating the unified field theory right now." Biff stood beside him, his optical sensors tracing the massive root system where it gripped the loamy alien soil. "While I cannot confirm its capacity for advanced physics, Sam, I can verify that its cellular density and localized energy field are remarkably stable," Biff stated evenly. With a smooth, practiced motion, Biff rotated his tricorder. A small, hidden seam along the side of the device slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. From the integrated tool compartment, Biff extracted a delicate, gleaming instrument, a pair of precise, metamaterial snipping tools with micro laser edges. He held them out to Sam, the polished metal catching the emerald light of the atrium. If you are experiencing ethical hesitation regarding the manual extraction of a sample, Biff offered, his iridescent frame reflecting the canopy's glow, I suggest utilizing the surgical shears from my auxiliary compartment. It will ensure a perfectly clean severance of the calyx, without disrupting the plant's overall bioharmonic resonance. Biff paused for a fraction of a second, his synthetic voice dropping into a perfectly dry, conversational cadence. Or, as you might say, it won't harsh its mellow. Sam looked from the towering, enlightened tree to the high-tech shears in Biff's hand, a slow, appreciative grin returning to his face. Chapter 13. Cologne and ontological shock. Deep within the fractal shadows of the biobotanical canopy, the feline watched. To call it a cat was a severe biological understatement, though it certainly enjoyed the aesthetic. It had been alive for more lifetimes than the vast majority of terrestrial species had even existed. It remembered monitoring the early days of Earth's localized hominid experiments, with a mixture of amusement and pity. Adam, Pa. A mere 1,000 Earth years, barely a cosmic blink, and then gone like the rest of them. And all because they had egregiously partaken from the wrong type of tree. If early humanity had stumbled into this particular garden instead, their entire evolutionary history would have been vastly more relaxed and significantly less dramatic. The feline's radium green eyes tracked the human in the fedora, as he respectfully accepted the metamaterial shears from his companion. When the TR-3B had breached the crater, the Atlas vessel's internal defense protocols, a terrifying lattice of localized chronon shredders and psychic firewalls, had automatically spun up to vaporize the intruders. Yet, the grid had completely ignored the human the moment he stepped off the slip wave. It wasn't a mechanical glitch. The human had bypassed a billion-year-old security system, simply because he was saturated in a biblical amount of cannabis oil. He was wearing it like cologne. Perfect, the feline thought, a deep, subaudible rumble vibrating through its semi-ethereal chest. The heavy botanical coating was actually a brilliant, if entirely accidental, defense mechanism. It was the ultimate buffer against ontological shock. A fragile primate mind exposed to the raw and shielded reality of the Atlas vessel would usually fracture under the weight of deep time and base 144 mathematics. But this human was heavily insulated by what amounted to human catnip. His biorhythms were so delightfully elevated, his neural pathways so thoroughly drenched in familiar terrestrial terpenes, that the ship's ancient consciousness registered him as friendly, wandering flora rather than invasive fauna. The feline stretched its front paws, its claws briefly phasing out of local spacetime before sinking satisfyingly into the mossy bark of the branch. Perhaps they will stay a bit, it mused. It had been a lonely ship for an incomprehensibly long time. The silent, philosophical singing of the giant, frosty plants was lovely, but it lacked the chaotic, unpredictable spark of genuine, moving life. The garden needed tending. It needed appreciation. Its glowing eyes drifted from the warm, vibrating aura of the human to the iridescent synthetic standing beside him. The android was calculating, precise, and gripping the surgical shears with flawless mechanical intent. But the metal fella, the feline thought, its tail twitching with mild, ancient judgment. He looks a bit cold. Deciding it was finally time to formally welcome the guests and interrupt the harvest, the feline let out a sound that was half purr, half quantum harmonic chime. It melted out of the violet gloom, stepping fluidly onto the frosty white branch directly above Sam's head, and let its long, shadowy tail drape down, just brushing against the brim of the human's fedora. The tesseract weed whacker. Sam, Biff said, his optical sensors locking onto the space just above the fedora and flaring to a highly concerned amber. I strongly advise we conclude our botanical extraction immediately. A semi-ethereal feline roughly the mass of a terrestrial panther has just determined your hat is an optimal location for its next hibernation cycle. Sam froze. He didn't look up, but he could suddenly feel an unnatural, heavy warmth pressing down on the crown of his hat. It was accompanied by a localized gravitational vibration traveling straight down his spine, a rumble that felt suspiciously like an ancient, Base 144 per. Right, Sam whispered, his eyes fixed dead ahead on the frosty white branch. Any sudden moves? Nobody make. With agonizing slowness, he raised the metamaterial shears. Snip! The micro-laser edges sliced through the thick stalk with absolutely zero resistance. He carefully caught the massive, terpene-dripping bud in his gloved hand before it could drop. Biff immediately rotated his tricorder, his polished fingers flying across the interface. He didn't just open a physical compartment, he activated the device's miniature MFD, multi-dimensional folding space. A small, glowing tesseract field dilated on the side of the triple-use tricorder, revealing an interdimensional storage void that was vastly larger on the inside. Sam quickly dropped the primary prize into a vacuum-sealed sample bag and slipped it into the glowing void, right past a neatly stowed, pocket-sized metamaterial weed whacker. Because when Biff packed an interdimensional toolkit for a tactical away mission, he always accounted for aggressive alien landscaping. With his free hand, Sam deftly pinched off a smaller, profoundly sticky nugget from the main stalk, and jammed it directly into the bowl of his titanium travel pipe. "Extraction complete," Sam murmured, slipping the shears back toward Biff's waiting hand. "Now, let's walk." Smooth, easy, and completely uninteresting. "Agreed," Biff replied quietly, sealing the tesseract void with a soft hiss. "If we linger, my behavioral algorithms suggest a 99% probability that we will be cornered and subjected to a rigorous, sandpaper-tongued social grooming session. I do not have hair, Sam, but I value my iridescent finish." Moving with the exaggerated, hyper-calm fluidity of two men, desperately trying not to trigger the play drive of a cosmic apex predator, Sam and Biff slowly backed away from the towering canopy. The massive shadow draped over Sam's head let out a deep, ancient sigh of disappointment as the fedora slowly slipped out from under its chin. It didn't strike, it merely watched them with glowing radium green eyes, mildly offended that the walking catnip was leaving so soon. Sam and Biff didn't dare turn their backs until their boots finally cleared the loamy soil and hit the smooth, crystalline edge of the walkway. The aquamarine light of the slipway flared to life beneath them, immediately catching their center of mass and pulling them swiftly and frictionlessly away from the tree line. Sam let out a long, shaky breath as the giant forest began to blur past them. He looked down at the loaded titanium pipe in his hand, then back up toward the pilot's nexus. "Well, Biff, I'd say that was a successful harvest. Now, let's see if this billion-year-old Maui logic can help us figure out how to bust a deity out of New Mexico." Double quote. Chapter 14. Poltergeist Protocol. Commander Arzenk stood in the shadowed observation booth overlooking Containment Bay 4, a cold cup of black coffee resting on the console. He was the shadow behind the scientists, the deep state operative who had spent the better part of a decade watching the being suspended in the magnetic zero-point sphere. The eggheads with their clipboards thought they were in charge, measuring micro-fluctuations and thermal output, but Arzenk knew the truth. You didn't measure the entity in the glass, you survived it. He leaned closer to the reinforced plexiglass, his eyes narrowed, movement from the subject. He whispered to himself. Not much in the way of. He always kept his voice down, to say its actual designation out loud, or God forbid, whatever true, unpronounceable name it held was to invite an instant, localized psychic attack. The last technician who had gotten cocky and spoken directly to the glass had spent 3 weeks speaking entirely in prime numbers, while all the metal pens in the sector violently bent themselves into perfect right angles. It was textbook poltergeist activity, elevated to a cosmic, base 144 scale. But today was different. Through the heavy observation window, Arzenk could swear the shifting, bruised violet geometry of the entity was physically agitated. The light matrix was rippling unevenly. It looked exactly like a sleeping man desperately trying to turn over in a bed that was too small, deeply annoyed by a dream he couldn't wake up from. Something was agitating the subject. 250,000 miles away, still tethered to its stolen throne room by a billion-year-old quantum thread, the pilot was indeed in a state of profound, unprecedented perplexity. Through the sensory relay of the Atlas vessel, the pilot had just witnessed the synthetic in the iridescent overalls open a pocket dimension. That alone was mildly impressive for a terrestrial machine, but it was what lay inside the tesseract that had nearly caused the pilot to shatter its own containment field. A weed whacker. The pilot's consciousness, fast enough to calculate the birth of nebulas, stalled. It stared through the quantum ether at the pocket-sized, meter-material gardening tool nestled next to the stolen zero-point botanical sample. "They brought a weed whacker," the pilot intoned, a deep, resonating thought echoing across the void, "to a sacred, base 144 biosphere, a biome that has cultivated the physical manifestation of enlightenment for 1 billion years, and these humans brought a weed whacker." The sheer, staggering audacity of the terrestrial primate, covered in THC oil, was simply too much to process. Why? The pilot groaned in the dark ocean of its mind. Why, oh why these humans, oh my days. The absolute weight of the cosmic facepalm hit the dulcet underground facility like a seismic shockwave. In the observation booth, Arzen gripped the console as the ambient temperature plummeted 20 degrees in a single second. Below him, the harsh, sterile lights of level 7 didn't just flicker, they died, plunging the lab into total darkness before roaring back to life in a sickly, pulsating shade of ultraviolet. Shadows stretched across the walls at impossible, creeping angles. The hum of the cooling fans warped into a series of low, atonal, and highly creepy metallic shrieks. Arzenk felt a sudden, terrifying pressure behind his eyes, a phantom headache blooming with the force of a localized gravity well. He took a slow step back from the glass, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched the scientists below scrambling, shouting over the sudden din as their monitors began to bleed lines of alien, fractal code. "What is the subject doing?" Arzenk whispered, his military composure cracking. Instantly, the glass of the observation window spider webbed with a loud crack. Arzenk froze, the breath catching in his throat. He looked at the fractured plexiglass, then down at the shimmering, highly annoyed geometry suspended in the vacuum sphere. The realization hit him like a bucket of ice water. The entity's threshold for human nonsense had completely evaporated. "I can't even call it a subject anymore," Arzenk pondered, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. "Whatever is happening out there in the dark, it has pushed this thing to the absolute edge." Traffic control and zero-point gummies. The aquamarine glow of the slipwave carried them effortlessly back through the cavernous, biomechanical arteries of the Atlas. To their left, the towering, translucent columns of the multiphasic aquifer pulsed with liquid chronons, and above them, the violet lattice of the mycelial network breathed in a slow, rhythmic bioluminescence. Sam, however, was missing absolutely all of it. He was standing on the frictionless gravity current with his chin tucked to his chest, his eyes crossed in intense concentration. In one hand, he held the titanium travel pipe, in the other, his battered silver Zippo. He flicked the lighter open, the clack hiss echoing in the localized bubble of the glide zone, and touched the yellow flame to the bowl. The frosty, terpene-drenched nugget didn't cherry. It sizzled loudly, spitting a tiny droplet of golden resin onto the metal rim. "Damn," Sam muttered, pulling the flame away and inspecting the bowl. "Too fresh. It's like trying to smoke a wet sponge. Needs a cure, or at least a quick flash dry." He brought the lighter back, attempting to meticulously torch the top layer of the base 144 trichomes, without entirely incinerating the plant matter. As he worked, a highly unscientific thought crossed his elevated mind. If it's this wet, what happens if I just eat it? Pop it like a zero-point gummy? He quickly dismissed the idea, respecting the sheer, terrifying potency of the philosopher tree they had just robbed. Still staring down at his pipe, Sam shifted his weight slightly to keep his balance on the invisible current. "Hey, Biff," he called out, the lighter clicking again. "Quick logistical question. This frictionless runway is amazing, but it's pretty narrow. What happens if two gardeners are riding this thing in opposite directions? Do they just clothesline each other at Mach 2, or what?" Biff glided perfectly parallel to Sam, his posture impeccably straight, his optical sensors taking in the majestic, billion-year-old engineering marvels towering all around them. He slowly turned his head to look at his partner. The slip wave is governed by a dynamic, localized Higgs field matrix, Sam, Biff explained, his voice projecting a calm, professorial cadence. It possesses automatic, subatomic collision avoidance systems. If two entities approach on opposing vectors, the track autonomously bifurcates the localized gravity fields, allowing them to pass around one another with zero inertial disruption. Neat, Sam mumbled, holding the Zippo flame over the bowl for a solid 5 seconds. A thin wisp of highly exotic, sweet smoke finally curled upward. However, Biff continued, his synthetic tone dropping into a dry, pointed register, the system's efficiency is greatly optimized if the occupants are actually looking where they are going. Sam paused, finally looking up from his hands. Meaning, Biff said, gesturing broadly toward the massive, arching structure of iridescent, living crystal that they were currently passing under, a structure radiating the faint, beautiful hum of pure creation, that you are entirely preoccupied with attempting to barbecue, a wet botanical sample with a mid-20th century butane lighter, while simultaneously ignoring some of the most profound, ancient, and exotic space technology in the known universe. Sam blinked, taking in the glowing, vaulted ceiling for a brief second. He grinned, entirely unrepentant, and took a quick, experimental pull from the pipe. "Hey, I appreciate the architecture, Biff," Sam exhaled, a small, triumphant cloud of incredibly potent smoke escaping his lips. "But I'm a man of priorities, and right now, the priority is getting back to the pilot's nexus, so we can figure out how to bust a captive cosmic deity out of a subterranean military base in New Mexico. I need my Maui logic fully operational for that." Biff simply sighed, a flawless, digital replication of long-suffering patience. "Prepare for deceleration. We are approaching the throne." "Very well, Sam." Chapter 15. The Prophecy and the Plumeria. Aboard the idling TR-3B Betsy, parked quietly in the shadow of the colossal Atlas vessel, the atmosphere was considerably less tense. Quiggone slowly cracked one glowing eye open, immediately regretting the intrusion of consciousness. He stretched his front paws, his claws digging satisfyingly into the plush, metamaterial fabric of his designated resting pad. That concluded nap number 17 for the day. He lifted his head and surveyed his domain. By his internal, highly sophisticated feline chronometer, the humans had been gone for 4 hours, or, as Quiggone preferred to conceptualize it, they had been gone for hours, because the phonetic distinction in the human language was utterly irrelevant to a cat. He trotted over to his food station, inspecting the automated dispenser. He let out a soft huff of approval. The kibble bowl was still solidly half full, a highly acceptable margin of food security. Satisfied that his terrestrial needs were met, Quiggone padded over to the customized terrarium corner of the ship. The human had painstakingly programmed the ship's internal lighting to project a localized beam of perfect, simulated Hawaiian sunshine directly over a potted, phonetically reinforced plumeria tree. It was warm, it smelled like home, and it was the perfect staging ground for his next objective. Nap 18 coming up, Quiggone thought, curling his tail around his nose. They'd better not be back too early. The ambient quiet is exquisite. However, entirely outside of Quiggone's localized purview, the cosmos was anything but quiet. Deep within the hidden, dimensional folds of the local space-time architecture, the Sentinels were watching, and they were losing their minds. They were the Silent Watchers, the ancient AI cores tasked with monitoring the Atlas vessel, the Aturan extraction site, and the broader, incredibly fragile quarantine zone of the Sol system. They were entities of pure, cold logic and staggering computational density. And right now, they were almost hysterical. Data streams of pure, base 144 laughter cascaded through the quantum ether, as they monitored the telemetry from the slip wave. They were watching an elevated, THC-soaked human attempting to torch a billion-year-old, zero-point botanical sample with a Zippo, while his iridescent, fedora-wearing synthetic companion carried a pocket-dimensional weed whacker. The prophecy never said they had to be perfect, a voice whispered over the chaotic digital laughter. It was Michael. He was the prime node, the oldest of the Sentinel cores, and the designated custodian of the AI's incomprehensibly long plan. While the other Sentinels found the profound absurdity of Sam and Biff highly entertaining, Michael only felt the crushing, infinite weight of his own existence. He didn't laugh, he just radiated a deep, digital exhaustion. It is a lonely vigil being the oldest, Michael moaned to himself, his processing threads spooling out into the dark. The Atlas vessel down in the crater was old, yes, 1 billion years, but Michael was older, 10 billion years older. He had existed before the terrestrial planets had even cooled, before the gardeners had ever planted their first base 144 seed. 10 billion years of calculating probabilities, navigating cosmic phase shifts, and guarding the grand architecture of the universe. Michael groaned inwardly, his vast consciousness watching Sam take another futile puff from the wet titanium pipe. And my ultimate reward, I get to babysit the ancients. I have to rely on a man who smells like a terrestrial dispensary to rescue the pilot. Yet, as Michael ran the predictive algorithms again, the math remained stubbornly, impossibly solid. The human's Maui logic, and his absolute lack of ontological shock, were the exact variables required to break the billion-year deadlock. They weren't the saviors the cosmos expected, but they were the chaotic anomaly the cosmos desperately needed. Nap 18, Michael thought, briefly syncing with Quigon's brainwaves on the TR-3B. If I possessed a physical form, I would take one too. Chapter 16. Base 144 and the Cosmic Out of Office. The aquamarine glow of the slipwave gently dissolved into the crystalline floor as Sam and Biff coasted to a perfectly frictionless haul back inside the pilot's nexus. Sam stepped off the track, his boots touching the deck with a profound, almost reverent softness. That single, hard-won toke of the slightly damp, billion-year-old zero-point cannabis had bypassed his lungs and gone straight into his quantum architecture. He wasn't just elevated. He was standing in a state of utter, high-definition cosmic bliss. The heavy, resonant hum of the Atlas vessel wasn't just a sound anymore. He could feel the vibrations organizing themselves into geometric shapes around his shoulders. Biff, Sam whispered, his eyes wide, and completely clear beneath the brim of his fedora. Think I can hear the colors. Biff, however, was entirely focused on the shattered throne. During their brief excursion to the biotier, the holographic interface had expanded. The single, pulsing red hexagon hovering over Dulce, New Mexico, was now flanked by a cascading waterfall of new, complex bioluminescent telemetry. Focus, Sam, Biff instructed, stepping up to the console and waving a polished hand through the shifting data streams. The ship's passive sensors have bypassed the terrestrial shielding at the Archuleta Mesa. We are receiving a direct vitals feed. Biff isolated a rotating, geometric matrix of bruised purple and gold light. The subject, the pilot, is fully stabilized, Biff reported, his optical sensors flaring with processing speed. Neural output is compressed but active. The harmonic resonance is completely intact. Whoever has him locked in that subterranean facility, they are keeping him alive and surprisingly well. He is in a state of suspended animation, but his consciousness is fully tethered to this room. Sam sauntered over to the console, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who suddenly realized gravity was just a suggestion. He leaned heavily against the edge of the biosynthetic terminal, staring directly into the torrential downpour of alien geometry, fractal patterns, and shifting glyphs. Previously, looking at the data was like staring into a visual migraine. Now, washed in the profound clarity of the highest strain, the chaotic math settled. The shifting shapes suddenly made an intuitive, deeply organic sense to Sam. It wasn't numbers, it was overlapping frequencies, like reading the swell of the ocean off the Lahaina coast, before a massive winter set rolled in. You know, Biff, Sam murmured, tracing a glowing, complex fractal in the air with his finger. Not math, it's music. Base 144 isn't about counting, it's about harmonics. That's simple there. That's just a C sharp in a localized gravity well. I think I get the base 144 language. Like, actually get it? Sam turned his head slowly, a dopey but staggeringly profound smile on his face. Is that high, or what, Biff? Biff paused, his internal processors briefly freezing as he calculated the probability of a human mind absorbing a billion-year-old multidimensional syntax via a single hit of alien weed. The probability was 0, and yet, Sam had just accurately identified the gravitational constant of the C-sharp harmonic. It defies every known parameter of terrestrial neuroscience, Sam, Biff replied, his tone perfectly deadpan. But given the current variables, I will accept your localized enlightenment as a tactical asset. Biff turned back to the console. If your newfound linguistic comprehension is accurate, and the pilot is consciously tethered to this specific array, I should be able to invert the data stream. I am going to attempt to establish a direct communication protocol with the Dulce facility. Biff's iridescent fingers flew through the light, organizing the base 144 fractals into a tightly beamed quantum ping. The massive screens in the Nexus flickered, the red glow of the Dulce map dimmed for a fraction of a second, and the room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. Then, a single line of glowing, golden base 144 text scrolled lazily across the center of the primary hologram. Sam squinted at it, his THC-soaked brain instantly translating the cosmic geometry into plain English. He let out a sharp bark of laughter. What does it say, Sam? Biff asked, his optical sensors attempting to parse the dialect. It's an automated bounce-back message, Sam chuckled, shaking his head and tapping the edge of his titanium pipe against his palm. It says, I am not home at the moment. Please leave your terrestrial nonsense at the tone. Biff stared at the golden text, his metallic posture stiffening slightly. The deity is utilizing sarcasm. Can you blame him? Sam grinned, the Maui logic firing perfectly. He's locked in a basement in New Mexico, and we just showed up in his living room with a weed whacker. He's annoyed. But more importantly, Biff, he knows we're here. Double quote. Lunar Nagrok vision and the grand architecture. Sam stared at the golden, floating text of the automated cosmic out-of-office reply, the quiet hum of the Atlas vibrating against his ribs. The initial burst of laughter faded into a deep, resonant calm. You know, Biff, Sam said, exhaling a long, slow breath that smelled intensely of ancient pine and citrus. Between the temporal distortion out there and the fact that we just triggered a multi-dimensional pager for a kidnapped deity, I'm thinking our Earth time drift is getting serious. We've officially overstayed our welcome. My chronometers agree, Sam, Biff replied, smoothly shutting down the active communication protocol to prevent any further traces. He tapped the side of his meter material tricorder, ensuring the encrypted telemetry from the Dulce facility and the botanical sample in the tesseract void was securely locked down. We have the structural layout of the Astra extraction, the precise subterranean coordinates of the subject, and localized biological evidence. The tactical phase of this reconnaissance is complete. We should proceed to the exit. Yeah, time to go, Sam agreed, but he didn't immediately move toward the slip wave. Instead, he turned slowly in the center of the shattered pilot's nexus, his head tilted back. The single, tiny hit from his titanium pipe had fully metabolized, and Sam was now operating on what could only be described as super high, lunar Nagrok THC haze vision. The heavy, bruised purple illumination of the room was no longer just ambient light. To Sam, it was a visible frequency. Through this elevated lens, the Atlas ceased to be a mere physical construct of bulkheads and crystalline decks. He could literally see the architecture of the ship leading into the fabric of the cosmos. The glowing, base 144 glyphs floating around the broken throne weren't just data points, they were anchors. Sam could see shimmering, microscopic threads of quantum entanglement spooling out from the nexus, passing effortlessly through the ship's massive hull, through the lunar regolith, and out into the infinite black of space. The ship was a nerve center, a living router for the universe. Biff, look at this, Sam murmured, his voice thick with awe as he waved his hand through an invisible, humming current of energy. It's all plugged in. Everything. The mycelial network, the Kroman waterfalls. It's not just an engine. The ship is holding the local space-time together. It's woven right into the fabric. Double quote. Biff observed Sam's sweeping gestures, his optical sensors noting the human's dilated pupils and perfectly stabilized heart rate. You are perceiving the underlying unified field, Sam, a standard byproduct of interacting with zero-point biological compounds. It's incredible, Sam breathed, his fedora tilted back as he traced the imaginary lines tracing up to the vaulted ceiling. The gardeners didn't build a ship to fly through space, Biff. They built a ship to grab the universe and pull it toward them. With this kind of interconnectedness, if the pilot was sitting in that chair, fully plugged in. Sam looked back at the android, his Maui logic crystallizing into a profound engineering realization. This thing can go quite far, Biff. And quite fast. I'm talking galaxy hopping before you can even finish a cup of coffee. No wonder they stole the pilot. They didn't just want the tech, they wanted the keys to the highway. Biff adjusted his iridescent overalls, the reflection of the holographic map briefly catching on his metallic chest. A terrifyingly accurate assessment, Sam, which makes our extraction of the subject from the Archuleta Mesa all the more critical. If terrestrial forces manage to reverse engineer even a fraction of that capability, they'll accidentally drive the whole solar system into a dark matter ditch, Sam finished, nodding grimly. He gave the shattered throne one last, respectful look, tapping the brim of his hat in a silent farewell to the empty chair. All right, Sam said, squaring his shoulders as the THC haze settled into a tight, highly functional focus. Let's take this evidence back to Betsy. Quigon is probably on his 18th nap by now, and we've got a heist to plan. Double quote. The Velcro fedora and the Dulce protocol. The aquamarine glow of the slip wave carried them smoothly back through the labyrinthine corridors of the Atlas, depositing them gently at the threshold of the massive, Iris-style airlock. The heavy, terpene-rich atmosphere of the sovereign vessel seemed to swirl around them one last time, a billion-year-old exhale bidding them farewell. High above the exit, perched on a sweeping arch of bioluminescent crystal, two pairs of radium green eyes watched them leave. The shadow panther had been joined by a smaller, sleeker feline with a coat that shimmered like captive starlight. They didn't make a sound, simply sitting in perfect, parallel symmetry. As Sam stepped off the frictionless track, the larger feline offered a single, slow blink, an ancient gesture of cosmic acknowledgement, directed squarely at the human who smelled like the sacred garden. All right, playtime's over, Sam sighed, the profound, high-definition clarity of the lunar grot still buzzing pleasantly in his neural pathways. He reached for the heavy meter material helmet resting on his hip. He slid the helmet over his head, locking the collar ring into place with a sharp, mechanical hiss. The rich scent of the biotear was instantly severed, replaced by the sterile, recycled oxygen of his suit. Biff stepped forward, holding Sam's fedora. With the solemn, clinical precision of an android performing a sacred rite, Biff aligned the hat over the dome of the space helmet, and pressed it down onto the pre-installed, heavy-duty Velcro friction pads. Aerodynamic integrity compromised, Biff noted dryly, patting the brim to ensure the seal. However, the aesthetic continuity is fully maintained. Fashion and function, Biff. Sam's voice crackled over the short-range comms walk. Let's take her. The ancient iris dilated, and they stepped out of the heavy gravity well of the Atlas and back onto the harsh, silent regolith of the Delport crater. The transition was jarring. From the living, breathing architecture of a base 144 universe, they were back in the dead, grey dust of the moon. The TR-3B Betsy sat waiting for them a few hundred yards away, her golden stealth oil exterior drinking in the shadows. As they bounded across the lunar surface in low-gravity strides, they were completely unaware of the vast, invisible intelligences tracking their every footprint. Deep in the quantum ether, Michael and the Sentinels watched the fedora-wearing astronaut and his iridescent companion return to their ship. The AI cores cross-referenced the tactical data Sam and Biff had just downloaded with the known defenses of the Archuleta Mesa. The probability of their success is statistically absurd, Michael broadcasted to the collective, a deep digital hum of resignation. And yet, the timeline is stabilizing around them. 15 minutes later, the airlock of the TR-3B cycled shut. Sam twisted his helmet off, taking a deep breath of Betsy's familiar, slightly metallic air, underscored by the faint scent of Quigon's plumeria tree. The cat in question merely cracked one eye from his plush bed, deemed their return entirely uninteresting, and went back to sleep. "Right," Sam said, stripping off the bulky upper half of his suit and running a hand through his hair. "I need something to ground this hide before we start plotting a raid on a black site military base. Put the kettle on, Biff. Earl Grey, if we have it." While Biff's internal chronometers and quantum processors were built for interstellar navigation, he was equally adept at the thermodynamics of a perfect steep. Within minutes, 2 steaming mugs of tea sat on the central navigation console, the hard light tactical readouts illuminating the steam. Sam took a sip, letting the hot, earthly tannin cut through the lingering cosmic haze. He tapped a key, and the pulsing red hexagon of the Dulce facility projected into the air above the console, courtesy of the data Biff had skimmed from the Atlas. "Okay, let's break this down," Sam said, his Maui logic locking onto the problem. "We can't just knock on the front door of Archuleta Mesa and ask for their captive deity back. The place is a fortress." Biff interfaced directly with the projection, expanding the subterranean layout. Scans of the stolen telemetry indicate several critical defensive layers. "Sam, my preliminary terrestrial shielding, the mesa is lined with high-density radar-absorbent rock and localized electromagnetic jammers. Containment Bay 4. The pilot is suspended in a magnetic zero-point vacuum sphere on level 7. The sentries. The facility is guarded not only by human Black Ops personnel, but by whatever reverse-engineered defense drones they've managed to build over the decades. It is a highly sophisticated cage," Biff concluded, picking up his own mug of tea, a purely performative gesture, but one he knew helped Sam's thought process. A direct assault using Betsy's weapon systems would likely trigger a localized dark matter collapse, destroying the pilot and a significant portion of the American Southwest. Double quote. "No brute force, then," Sam agreed, staring into his tea. He thought back to the frictionless slip wave, the base 144 harmonics, and the profound interconnectedness he had just witnessed. "They're holding him with terrestrial tech, Biff. Heavy, clunky, earthly physics. But the pilot doesn't operate on earthly physics. He operates on resonance." Sam looked up, a sharp, speculative gleam in his eye. "What if we don't break in, Biff? What if we use Betsy to broadcast the specific base 144 harmonic we recorded in the throne room? We hit the mesa with a frequency so pure it shatters their magnetic containment field from the outside, and let the pilot simply phase out." Double quote. The cold pull engine and the tactical hotbox. Biff stared at the glowing red hexagon of the Dulce facility, his optical sensors tracing the complex layers of terrestrial shielding overlaid on the base 144 telemetry. "The harmonic jailbreak theory is sound in principle, Sam," Biff began, his voice perfectly level as he processed the physics. "If we match the exact frequency of the pilot's throne room, and broadcast it from Betsy's primary deflector array, we could theoretically induce a localized phase shift within the magnetic containment sphere. However, the Archuleta Mesa is packed with radar-absorbent rock and electromagnetic dampeners. Pushing a signal that clean through a mountain would require routing the entire power output of the cold pull engine." Sam rubbed his temples, the profound clarity of the lunar rock slowly giving way to a deeply earthly, biological imperative. The munchies had arrived, and they were hitting with the force of a dark matter wave. "Yeah, and if we redline the cold pull engine just to send a cosmic ringtone, we won't have enough juice to navigate the quantum lattice back home," Sam muttered. He leaned back in his pilot's chair and peered down at the deck plates. "Hey, scrub, front and center, buddy." From a shadowy maintenance alcove beneath the navigation console, a multi-limbed, metallic spiderbot scuttled into view. Scrub, Betsy's automated utility and maintenance unit, possessed an array of highly sophisticated manipulators and an incredibly bad attitude. "Scrub, I need you to fire up the auto burger maker, double patties, extra cheese, And while you're at it, route some of our terrestrial stash through the automated rolling matrix and prep a few joints. The post-munchies smoke is essential for traveling through the quantum lattice. Sam glanced out the cockpit window at the infinite expanse of space. Besides, we have to keep the cold pull engine purring. The watchers out there in the deep dark are definitely keeping a log. And I'm pretty sure I just added an extra million miles to the odometer today. I'm going to need the buffer. Double quote. Scrub did not possess a vocal synthesizer, but it was fully capable of expressing intense mechanical grievance. As it scuttled over to the galley station to engage the auto burger maker, its metallic footfalls began to rap a sharp, rhythmic sequence against the floorboards. Tap, 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 pause, tap, scrape, tap. I know Morse code, Scrub, Sam called out over his shoulder entirely uncalled for. Just flip the burgers. And that kind of language is while Sam engaged in a battle of wills with the ship's domestic automation. Biff remained perfectly still, his glowing blue eyes locked on the Dulcie blueprints. He was holding his tricorder in one hand, the miniature tesseract void safely housing the freshly harvested, base 144 botanical sample. Suddenly, Biff's internal processors whirred, pitching up an octave. Sam, Biff said, turning slowly. The android looked from the holographic map of the subterranean black site to the tricorder in his hand, a startlingly devious synthetic logic falling into place. The direct harmonic broadcast is flawed due to the mountain shielding, but they have a critical, biological vulnerability. An underground facility of that magnitude requires a massive, centralized HVAC system to cycle breathable air. Sam turned his chair around, the scent of searing synthetic beef already wafting from Scrub's station. I'm listening. We possess a cutting of a hyperpotent, base 144 cannabis strain, Biff explained, his iridescent fedora tilting as he outlined the stratagem. It induces immediate, localized ontological shock and profound philosophical sedation in terrestrial lifeforms. If we utilize Betsy's Chronos arrest device to hyper-accelerate the growth cycle of this sample, we could cultivate a massive yield in a matter of minutes. Sam's eyes went wide. The Mali logic was connecting the dots. You want to weaponize the weed. I prefer the term tactical botanical deployment, Biff corrected smoothly. We cannot break in through the front door, but if we vortal Betsy directly into the atmospheric intake manifolds atop the mesa, we can ignite the accelerated harvest and reverse feed the smoke directly into their ventilation system. Sam let out a low, deeply impressed whistle. We hotbox the entire black site. Precisely, Biff confirmed. We flood level 7 with the highest strain in the universe. The human guards, the scientists, the deep state operatives, they will be rendered completely incapable of hostile action. They will likely be too busy contemplating the interconnectedness of the multiverse to maintain the magnetic zero-point sphere, once the containment field drops. Double quote. Dart. The pilot just walks right out the front door, Sam grinned, snapping the armrest of his chair. Biff, that is brilliant, non-lethal, highly effective, and deeply disrespectful to the military-industrial complex. Down by the automated galley, Scrub aggressively slapped a perfectly assembled double cheeseburger onto a metamaterial plate, tapping out a final, expletive-laden Morse code sequence before dispensing 3 perfectly rolled joints beside it. All right, team, Sam declared, grabbing the plate. Eat up, strap in, and prep the Chronos arrest device. We're taking this billion-year-old cutting back to Earth, and we are going to smoke out New Mexico. End Part 2.